The girls snapped to attention when a stranger stepped into the dojo, every stare screaming the same question. Who was he? He tore through the dojo, crushing every opponent and looking like a raving madman. Alucia declared they'd be fine. Master Beryl was there. He'd deal with that foolish man himself. Alucia's eyes betrayed her. She couldn't spot her master's barrel sword. Reluctant admiration flared. She had to admit the visitor was impressive. The story explodes to life in the kingdom of Labaris, a proud monarchy where famed knights and daring adventurers carve their names into legend. Most of the great heroes etch their names into history. This man was the master who forged them. Then the truth slammed home. The master swordsman of the fields was him. She rode inside a rattling carriage, barreling down the road on a journey. The guide grinned, thanked her for her patience. They were almost there, and she flashed him a grateful smile, thanking him back. That place hit like a tidal wave of nostalgia. You're telling me it's inside the dojo? Before the sun rose, Beryl drilled relentlessly. His father pressed, "Isn't it time you acted like a good son and gave me a grandchild?" Beryl sighed, heavy and resigned. He helmed the dojo, and soon they'd be flooded with new disciples. His father hunted through the disciples for a good girl, but the protagonist saw none. The place screamed discipline, not flirting. Every swordsman there burned to be hailed as a knight or to forge a legend as an adventurer. Born clutching a sword, he chased that same goal with burning, single-minded fury. He dreamed he'd someday storm into a city and save countless people. In the end, he was forced into the role of a self-defense master, drilling survival moves into anyone who'd listen. That's how it played out. Exactly what you'd expect from a man of his caliber. News that he'd be getting a disciple hit him like a thunderclap. Memory slammed into him. An old student had once told him they wanted to marry him. Just then, a girl burst into the dojo and asked for permission. Alucia reappeared. Same girl from the past, now older and bristling with fierce new resolve. So much time had passed, he almost didn't recognize her. Then she exploded into laughter, delighted that he hadn't changed a bit. Now she'd ripped off the last shreds of childhood and strode into adulthood. Alucia Citrus, commander of the Knights of Liberis, bears the sacred duty of guarding the crown's most important figures. That girl was his disciple, a prodigy from the second he laid eyes on her. With a single glance, she mirrored every move he made. Stepping out of the dojo, Beryl thrust a sword into her hands. A parting gift. He stared, stunned that she still clung to that old sword when sharper, deadlier blades were hers for the taking. Relief exploded in the disciple. One sword was enough. The swordsman zeroed in, eyes locked, and pressed. "How can I help this time?" She dropped the bombshell. She was the one training the soldiers, too. An instructor bore the responsibility of guiding and training knights, forging them into the kingdom's finest. Beryl's chest swelled with fierce pride when one of his students finally attained that position. He threw his weight behind her as an instructor, and everyone agreed without a single complaint. It blindsided him, striking like a thunderbolt. The Order of Knights summoned him to the palace. A cold dread knotted in his gut. As the kingdom's instructor, he now had to be the undisputed best. Outside, a carriage idled, poised to whisk them away. Alucia grabbed his arm and urged him to rush to the capital. The program needed immediate adjustments. Right then, the king's decree, stamped with the royal seal, arrived. No escape. The protagonist was dragged out the door and forced to go anyway. They tore toward Voltrain, the towering capital of the kingdom of Liberis. Inside the thunderous halls of the Order of Knights' official castle, Alucia vowed to side with the order. He'd step in as their official instructor. She burned with hope that each person there would shatter every expectation. Just as everyone expected, silence crashed over the crowd. No one so much as blinked after the announcement. Over 100 people had gathered, and their stances screamed they were the real deal. The swordswoman admitted her master had left her in the dust and demanded that everyone undergo the training. He had to choke out a few words that knotted his stomach. Beryl never meant to speak. When he tried to introduce himself, his voice cracked, and his words betrayed him. He was nothing but an old man. Heap praise on him, and they'd pile impossible expectations onto his shoulders. That went down in the carriage earlier. She casually dropped that it'd only be a few times a month. She had several disciples under her wing, and the rare flashes of her guidance were more than enough. Beryl scoffed, convinced those guys didn't need a scrap of training. They barreled into the city to shop, answering his father's request. Given her position, they practically burst into the spotlight. She told herself she was used to it, but the commander striding beside an old man made every head on the street snap around. Eludia's heart fizzed with giddy hope. She was already calling it a date. Beryl, cool and unconvinced, didn't see it that way. Suddenly, another figure burst into view. She sneered and tore the moment apart right before their eyes. That woman was Lysandra. Sparks erupted from her black guild plate. They hailed her as the strongest adventurer. The moment she spotted the protagonist, Lysandra exploded with excitement at the sight of Beryl. Recognition slammed into him. He knew her the instant he saw her. His memory fumbled, then seized her name, Selena. Even after 20 years, the memory still seared him, and the girl crumpled under a wave of raw emotion. Selena, an orphan, found her way to the dojo long ago and honed her blade through 3 relentless years. Seeing their reaction, Alucia barked that her master was busy and needed to step away. They bristled at each other, the air between them crackling with quiet resentment. The room exploded as Lysandra insisted on taking her master to the guild, and Alucia flat out refused. On the street, people buzzed about 2 titans who kept clashing without end. Beryl let out a shattered sigh, helpless as the situation slipped beyond her control. As the adventurers swept them through the city, they dove headfirst into a curious little shop. Everywhere they stepped, chatter exploded. People couldn't stop talking about the 2 of them. They were dazzling women. This was the Knight's Order Forge, and the protagonists instantly realized the place brimmed with masterwork swords. The seller grinned and dared him to test one. Go ahead, pull no punches. The girls erupted into gleeful squeals, their eyes blazing with excitement. After so long, they finally watched their master in action. Each move a thunderclap. A razor edge means nothing without raw power driving it home. The Makawara's resistance matched human flesh, and when the blade slammed into it, the sword didn't cut. It buckled and bent. Exhausted to his core, he fought to steady his ragged breath and sharpen his focus, then seized that trusty blade and surged into the attack. Right on cue, his disciples' predictions came true. His blade's strike sliced clean and razor smooth. The target freezes, utterly unmoved even after the attack. They left empty-handed. They'd shown up with empty pockets. It's already barreling this way! Recognition shot through Lysandra when she saw the sword. But the truth of it slammed into her like a cold, unforgiving blade. The shop owner barked that some apprentice must have muddled it. The sword's blade lay blunt and worthless. No buyer would touch it, so it couldn't be sold. Shock hit like a freight train. That was the master swordsman's power, poised to erupt with titanic, untapped potential. Beryl had squandered every shred of trust. He didn't deserve the mantle of real instructor. A lie wrapped around them. One slip from him and everyone would be doomed. He needed a plan, and he'd forge it the moment he got back home this time. But when he confronted his father, a cold voice snapped at him. Don't come home, not for a while. Moments later, he raced over to Eludia and revealed his decision. It all boiled down to this. A certain figure slid into the dojo while he was away. It was Landred. He hurled himself into adventuring and took his place among the protagonist's disciples. He had a son and weaponized fatherhood as his ticket out of the job. Beryl nearly went blind, his eyes scorched by the blinding splendor of the young apprentice getting married. Everything hinged on one burning question. What would unfold from that moment on? His father slammed his palm down and declared the dojo was now Landred's. At last he could sprint back into the city and shoulder the duty waiting for him. He couldn't set foot in his home until he found a wife. The rule blindsided him. Alucia's grin widened. This stacked the odds in her side's favor. Beryl had nowhere to stay that night and shot a frantic plea for help at her. She practically thrust the offer at him. Stay at my place tonight if you want. And he froze. He never thought that would be proper. He burst into the Adventurers Guild. He stumbled into a place he'd never been, hunting for somewhere to stay, when the woman with the sword decided it was perfect. Their journey suddenly threw them face to face with Lysandra. Shock hit him square in the chest. He still hadn't returned home since the day before. He asked for help with something, and the girl beamed, leaping in to help without hesitation. Once he'd spelled it out, the room hung on his every word. The adventurer cracked a sly grin and volunteered to show a few bargain spots. He jabbed his finger at one just a stone's throw from the guild, rock-solid safe. But before that, Alucia implored them to wait. Duty summoned the master to the barracks, so a spot by his house made far more sense. They exploded into a furious debate about pestering Beryl. Chaos swirled around them as the two braced, swords poised to trade deadly blows. The protagonist lunged into the fray. He barreled in and snatched them up before they could stir up chaos. At least that's what they figured would erupt if they ever clashed. They slammed to a halt, and the protagonist froze, confusion churning in his gut. He couldn't fathom what they were thinking. For a heartbeat, he swore they'd both draw blades and clash steel. The innkeeper flung the door wide and unveiled the room our protagonist would spend the night in. He could seize the moment and greet Lysindra. Beryl's eyes lit up. The room was a steal, far from the barracks but perfectly placed. Those two girls made it happen, and Eludia bristled, frustration sparking in her eyes. All night he downed drink after drink, muttering that he was pathetic. He'd toiled as an instructor, and now the place stood ready, every corner set by his apprentices. He was just an old man, bewildered and unable to fathom what they expected of him. The next day, exhaustion clung to Beryl like a lead weight, but he forced a smile and assured his disciple he was fine. She ushered him night after night to the training hall so he could see it. The nights thundered through brutal drills, blades flashing and sweat spraying as they sharpened every strike, and one of them wielded a terrifying, unstoppable strength. He snapped the sword clean in two. Elodia called out that the group was drilling their moves as if the fight was already raging. She bellowed the news to everyone. They anointed Beryl the knight's new instructor. Although they couldn't bring themselves to doubt their commander, they shot the protagonist a cold, mistrustful glare, Just as he'd feared, the crowd recoiled, every face twisted into a menacing glare. A lone hand shot up, its owner poised to speak. A girl waved and called out that it had been a while since she'd last seen him. Beryl's eyes snapped to her. It was Kiruni, and she beamed, thrilled she'd greeted him. Pride exploded in him as the girl strode into knighthood, even though she couldn't bring herself to feel like a knight. She beamed after the lesson, but a towering mountain of practice still loomed before her. This hit the protagonist like a punch to the chest. Tears burst from their eyes as raw emotion ripped through them, because the kids had shot up so much. Before he knew it, dependence had crept in. He'd started leaning on his students, and it was long past time to tear that crutch away. In the end, age had carved him into an old man. This was the duty men couldn't refuse. Then a guy strode forward and asked for a chance to speak too. It was Brits, the man who snapped his rival's sword in half with raw, crushing strength. Him bellowed, "I'm the vice commander of the Order of Knights." Since yesterday, he'd been pinned under that person's piercing stare. He could call himself the living incarnation of bloodlust. Liberios took fierce pride in their Order of Knights, and becoming an instructor that way meant shouldering immense responsibility. The commander championed him for the position. He demanded to test him first. Even Alucia sensed the moment had arrived. She demanded her master unsheathe the sword in the light of day. The Order of Knights of Liberus. Now that's a name that turns whispers into shivers. He was hailed as the kingdom's most powerful, and only a handful of the elite were handpicked for extra training. A knight from Libaris wielded a power that could crush 10 kingdoms into dust. Trust me, the vice commander was a walking legend, one of the absolute best in the whole force. Everything lurched, flipping direction in a heartbeat. If he refused and stormed off now, every whisper would swell into a roar of doubt. He recoiled at the thought of being exposed to the world and utterly crushed. Worst of all, Beryl's failure could drag Elusia out of her position. She still saw it as a golden opening they could pounce on. A roaring crowd surged together, voices crashing like thunder. Everyone leaned in, breath held and hearts racing, desperate to see what would happen next. Kiruni's breath hitched. It was her first time watching her master fight, and worry burned in her veins. The vice commander was a walking juggernaut, raw, inhuman strength pulsing in every move. He cleaved a raging bull with a single thunderous swing of his wooden sword. Still, the commander barked that everything would be fine. They just had to watch like hawks. The moment he learned they'd be getting the instructor she recommended, the so-called master swordsman of the field, he practically lunged forward to plead for guidance. A middle-aged man emerged, eyes hollow and empty, like someone whose soul had been snuffed out. That's when the vice-captain's doubts detonated into a blazing suspicion. Alucia obeyed like a trained shadow. If a former teacher asked, the word no died on her tongue. If he was mistaken, the worst of it would melt away. To him, the man was a parasite, worming his way into the Order of Knights. Bloodlust roared in the protagonist as he stared, wondering what the hell was up with this guy. He steeled himself. He refused to accept a shameful defeat. He snapped his attention to the task, locked his eyes, and plunged into razor-sharp focus. The stage was set. The battle exploded to life. The battle ignited. He rocketed forward and slammed into his opponent first. Everyone went rigid as the wooden swords slammed together with a thunderous crack. Because in a heartbeat, the protagonist drove the vice-captain to his knees. He instantly crushed him. Nobody saw a thing. It blitzed past in a heartbeat, too fast for their eyes to catch. Alutia steeled herself and began to recount it all. Everything began the moment he advanced. He locked his gaze on his master's throat, breath catching, then realized the man had only slipped into a faint. He lunged, driving a brutal horizontal slash across his exposed torso. He slammed his own sword into the incoming strike and killed the attack in its tracks. A brutal swipe knocked his sword aside, sending him stumbling. It moved with lightning speed. Only a handful could keep up. Then the protagonist's reflexes kicked in. Someone clocked him right in the face. He blurted an apology, insisting it was accidental, and the vice captain waved him off, telling him not to worry. It hit him. This guy standing before him was unmistakably different. He wielded a strength no one could match. Everything hinged on the eyes staring out from that man. Whether it's the enemy's breath, gaze, posture, center of gravity, grip, or technique, each one betrays their intent. He could pick out the tiniest differences with razor-sharp eyes. Polished to an impossible gleam, the blade seemed to see everything. Beryl stormed to another victory. Everyone knew his opponent had been crushed. Imagine if those blades had been the real deal. He should have been slain countless times. He executed the move, a precise technique. It eluded even his commander's sight. When the attack struck, even Karuni's composure cracked. He flashed the backs, dazzling the hands, and suddenly his true reach vanished from sight. Your hand dove behind the hilt as the first leg pulled off a floating escape. It could pulverize its enemy into dust. That motion slammed into the barrel and ricocheted away. A brutal blow slammed into him from behind. It demanded the hands of a true swordmaster. We plunge back into the past. If Alutia hadn't stepped in, he'd have seized the mantle of commander. A jolt of wrongness slammed into him the moment he faced her. Their gazes split, each staring the opposite way. He slammed the question at her. Why did she choose to join the Knights? And reality yanked us back into the present. When the protagonist vanquished him, everyone erupted into applause for her performance. At last, the commander struck the final blow and ended the battle. The group burst into the night, hunting down drinks. Glasses shot up as the crowd roared a toast to the protagonist's appointment as instructor. The group tore into the feast and slammed back their drinks. Most of all, I'll seek you out. He hunted the richest flavors, a born connoisseur with a ferocious palate. The protagonist even pitched one more round of beer. Nerves hit her like a freight train. She'd only thought the food was tasty, nothing special. Later, she confronted Karuni, rage igniting after his taunts about her huge belly. Amid the chaos, someone burst onto the scene and held out another bottle of drink like a lifeline. They shared the drink, and Alutia's eyes burned with jealousy. She wanted to serve him too. Several guild members, the vice captain among them, swarmed Beryl, lavishing him with fierce, heartfelt gratitude. Regret slammed into him. He burned to apologize for challenging him so rudely and to make amends. Once drunk, he snapped. His composure evaporated and he shouted without pause. Embarrassment slammed through him, but his heart burned with fierce, unwavering admiration. The alcohol hit, loosening their tongues until they were blurting out truths they'd kept bottled up. The captain shot a question at the protagonist about dueling the vice, and the protagonist admitted the man was a powerhouse. His arms stretched far beyond any normal humans. His spinning cut stole the show, slicing through the air with flawless precision. He catapulted to that level in a blink, blowing everyone away. Beryl realized a direct square hit would have killed him, so he lunged aside. He seized the moment and growled that anyone lingering behind him now would slip straight into his blind spot. The man dropped into a bow, and the protagonist's jaw hit the floor. But he accepted him as the linchpin of the Order of Knights. Even the mightiest were still green, nerves coiling in their chests as they stared down the road ahead. Beryl shoved the notion aside and shot back that he hoped they'd get along. His breath caught. The master swordsman from the countryside stood before him, impossibly real like a dream come alive. Surprise exploded through him, but he'd already plunged back into his drink and coldly ignored him. Later, Eludia let out a sharp sigh, mortification flushing her cheeks. She tore into drink right at her master's side and, before long, likely spewed crude, drunken filth. Maybe she let her guard slip, drunk on how perfectly her plan was falling into place. Beryl's words replayed in her mind, igniting a quiet, stubborn admiration she couldn't shake. She twisted away from that strike again, but her wooden sword splintered. She radiated brilliance, an incredible person as always. Back then, in the dojo, the protagonist thrust a sword into her hands as a parting gift. He'd taught her everything he knew, and a gnawing worry settled in her gut. Her master towered far above her and flat out rejected it. Beryl's stomach dropped. She'd overestimated him again. Unlike him, Alucia was a born prodigy whose talent burned too bright to be caged in the dojo. Her heart splintered every time he belittled himself like that. That day, she carved out a plan and etched her life's goal in stone. That year, she went to face the test. A swarm of hopeful candidates had gathered. She obliterated every written exam, taking first place in every single one. She was barely more than a kid, underage and barred from even a single sip of alcohol. First, contenders clashed in brutal duels, and the chosen stormed straight into battle against the instructors. They lunged into the duel. Elutia was hurled into battle to face her opponent. Gasps exploded, every face froze in stunned disbelief. She cut down her adversaries with unnerving ease. Every candidate boasted they were the undisputed best. Even the order's instructors weren't spared. In the end, disappointment seared her. This was all the Night Order had to offer. Her master dwarfed everyone there. Alocha said the grueling admission exam and strode into the kingdom's order as a newly minted knight. They singled her out and asked her to step up as an instructor. She towered above everyone in skill, and she knew saying yes could make everything far more complicated. She'd been craving this chance, so she snatched the offer and accepted it on the spot. She knew someone else was far better suited to do the job. She became a knight to forge a stage worthy of her master. They waved it off as an exaggeration and branded her arrogant and selfish. She apologized, confessing she had no hunger to chase the knight's glory. The thought of no one ever knowing Beryl's true power tore her apart. Back when she still trained at the dojo, she struck a boy, and her master stormed over, summoning her back. A freak accident rocked the competition, but she could still stage a comeback. She sobbed, choking out apologies, too ashamed to lift her eyes to her master. He crashed down beside her and thrust a handkerchief toward her, letting her wipe her face. Relief crashed over Beryl as she confessed she was genuinely happy. Her disciple had escaped unscathed. Not that the other boy getting hurt was something to celebrate. It was when he launched into talking about his students. Maturity still eluded him. So long as his were unbroken, that alone sufficed. Alucia's heart thundered. Her real fight with the blade was only beginning. From this moment, she held the power to forge a brand new era. Before long, they'd crown her the master of the sword. For now, he was just an old man, drowned in booze and bracing for a brutal hangover. News about the vice commander tore through the ranks. News of being made a fool by the instructor spread like wildfire. She hadn't faced the commander. She'd been forced to duel the master swordsman of something. It was the master swordsman from the interior. He froze, shock ripping through him. The city's west side roared with commerce, its streets teeming with shops of every kind. Crowds flooded the streets, brawls ignited at every turn, so armored knights prowled the alleys. Karuni reassured Beryl, urging her to relax and promising everything would be fine. A rare day of rest dawned, and they seized it to bask in perfect peace. He admitted he'd finally settled into the city's rhythm, but lately he'd been roaming its streets alone. He rattled off Valtrain's famous spots, insisting everyone was worth a visit. Karuni swept in, offering to show him around. His duty post was just around the corner. Right there, he unveiled the West Side's largest market. The city buzzed with a wild mix of everything. She'd cut through it every so often. The protagonist, a middle-aged bumpkin, froze, his mind a blank. He had no clue where to start. Young Karuni whisked him through a parade of clothing shops, dragging him toward every little wonder the street had to offer. Midway down the path, Beryl slammed into a hooded girl whose eyes went wide the instant she recognized him. There she was, Fissel, and the protagonist's heart jolted. Could she be one of Karuni's acquaintances? He stared, baffled, until she sighed. This guy had no heart. And in that instant, his eyes locked on the sword she carried, and recognition hit him. Memories slammed back into her. She remembered who she truly was. Fissel's smile faltered, stung by being forgotten, and the protagonist immediately apologized. She drifted through hallways like a shadow, cloaked in silence and speaking to almost no one. She absorbed every sword technique, seized one last farewell move, and strode out of the dojo. Karuni beckoned her companion to walk beside them, seizing the perfect chance. Fissel hurtled into the city, driven by her duty as a member of the magical division. A gasp ripped free from the protagonist. She'd learned magic too. This division brimmed with mages who, shoulder to shoulder with knights, hammered the kingdom's power into being. He was sure she meant to seize a sword and walk the warrior's path. She plunged into magic, training an incredible child who was a prodigy. Amid the bustling shops, the girls flaunted gleaming enchanted gear and sparkling arcane accessories. She wore the candlestick ring, its tiny flame flickering to life, and the protagonist erupted with excitement. A pair of earrings bore a curse. This time, Thistle snapped them up because they were rare. Cursed or not, if she refused to slip them on, the curse couldn't touch her and she'd be fine. Grudges burned in people's hearts as they resented the mages, convinced they were evil. That's why Thistle would step up and give. She thrust a rest bracelet into her master's hand. Worn while he slept, it would erase his aches. The Order's training must be exhausting. She could ignite a movement, proclaiming that magic was here to help. A wave of emotion surged through the protagonist. He adored that the bracelet matched. A thief barreled past, ripped her purse away, and the woman screamed. Right then, the girls surged after him, sprinting to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Surprise slammed into him. Thistle snatched her sword and charged, ignoring the spell she should have unleashed. Then an even bigger surprise slammed everything upside down. That's the instant she fused blade work with raw sorcery, slashing and unleashing magic in the same heartbeat. Her thrust ripped through the air and sent the thief flying like a discarded scrap of paper. This was the power she'd trained for so long, now roaring to life. The other one bolted into a shadowed alley. It was barely a blip on the radar, because the magical swordswoman stormed into the fray, and he hunted him down without breaking a sweat. Karuni shadowed her, snatching the defeated thieves off the ground, and Beryl gaped. How could knights be like this? They gaped and blurted it out. Fizzle's magic was nothing short of breathtaking. A blade-bound spell flooded her with power. She mastered it like no one else, jaw-dropping. The technique let him strike from the blind side even while gripping a sword. She honed her swordplay to a razor edge, and Beryl burned with curiosity about who'd trained her. The magical division's commander forged her skills, and whenever he named his old master, praise poured from him. The swordswoman's eyes narrowed. To her, the two were cut from the same cloth. The bracelet clicked shut, and a blissful ease flooded Beryl's shoulders. If his students could pull off those jaw-dropping rolls, he had to admit his lessons packed a punch. He swallowed it, slammed the lid on his pride, and refused to let it swell his ego. Praise thundered for his students alone, while he stood empty-handed. No true achievement to his name, mid-stride on his walk. Out of nowhere, the protagonist's eyes snapped to a lone flame floating in mid-air. A feminine silhouette snapped into being and unleashed a relentless barrage of attacks at him. Beryl darted through a hail of attacks, slipping past each strike, and hurled himself into a ferocious fight against this shadowed silhouette. He slashed at her, but she stood unscathed, still completely intact. Magic's power hit us like a lightning bolt, undeniable. It shimmered like a doll spun from pure, crackling magic. He rained blow after blow, but every strike faded as her wounds knitted themselves shut. The protagonist sprinted away, exploiting his pursuer's momentum to break free. Thistle admitted flinging spells across long distances barely worked and left him utterly spent. The fire mentor loomed nearby. If he shifted the fight somewhere else, he'd have nowhere left to hide. Not long after, a girl burst into view. She doubled over laughing at the outrageous audacity he'd shown. Beryl gaped, refusing to accept she was a child, and the girl bristled, snapping at being called one. Realization slammed into her. This was the master of the inner sword, and the rumor about his strength snapped into brutal, undeniable truth. Then the protagonist's eyes snapped open as a fierce realization slammed into them. She'd probably heard of him straight from that man's lips. He'd personally christened him the Thunderous Blade. He wasn't acting on a whim, he had his reasons. That girl had come there to rip his life from him. Even Beryl realized she wasn't joking. A cold knot in her gut screamed that something was wrong. In that heartbeat, my gaze snapped to the stranger's wrist. He wore a bracelet, too. She dropped the bomb on him. She'd stolen it ages ago from a mage swordswoman. He exploded into laughter, already picturing the face of the person who'd used it. Being grilled about the mage's whereabouts set his blood boiling, and the girl just smirked, basking in the fury she'd stirred. If that's the case, he'd make her crack and spill the truth. They lunged at each other, the fight erupting into pure chaos. They burst into battle, clashing with savage intensity. The girl snapped to attention. Her opponent was undeniably skilled. When the dust finally settled, they lunged at his blind spot, but he rooted himself and refused to budge. A grin split her face. Beryl couldn't bridge the gap. Spells erupted around him in a chaotic surge, crowding him until at last a pocket of space ripped open and he could move. She could only strike with magic, so she had to unleash spell after spell. If this power bowed to human strength, it would slam headfirst into a hard limit. Now it was a raw showdown of endurance. Who would outlast the other? The girl hadn't even unleashed her true power yet. The real battle hadn't begun. Water surged in and swallowed the whole place. And this time, the protagonist's blade failed to connect. She coiled like a spring, primed to strike, convinced he couldn't parry or dodge now. She lunged forward, unleashing a savage strike aimed straight at him. They held their breath, desperate to see how he'd fare. The instant water slams into anything scorching hot, it explodes into an immediate, furious boil. They branded that roaring blast a steam explosion. Not even that level of preparation could make Beryl hesitate. He charged on. He teetered on the brink. A hair slower and he'd be dead. Had that choice swung the other way, the whole ending would have blown apart. He ripped a chunk of earth free and slammed it up like a shield. She flung her arms wide. The protagonist jolted back, retreating in an instant. A bolt of confusion struck because she kept the pressure on him, relentless and crushing. She swallowed her next strike and let out a defeated sigh. If Beryl could see right through her, she was utterly powerless. Thistle had predicted it, and every moment played out exactly as he said. Recognition hit her like lightning. This was the woman who had taught that girl magic. That girl revealed herself as Lucy Diamond. They commanded the magical division and towered, unbeaten as the kingdom's strongest mage. The mage heard a barrel clatter from Thistle, who swore he'd be able to face her spells. Oddly calm with death on his heels, he refused to hurl himself at the magic blindly. The protagonist demanded why she was ripping the place to shreds, and the girl shot back she'd never be taken seriously any other way. She swallowed her pride and forced out an apology, desperate to look cool in front of her disciples. Suddenly they heard a voice explode into a shout. The square was frozen. Her magic lay abandoned, and the two bolted before it vaporized. The protagonist locked eyes with Thistle. He thanked her, voice raw with relief, for the bracelet she'd given him because it had actually worked. Thistle clutched the potion brewed by the magical division, poised to hand it over. The box sat like a leaden anchor. Even Beryl strained, his hands grasping for a way to help her and coming up empty. That the division commander had made them proved her terrifying skill, and no one knew Lucy's age. People whispered she used magic to never grow old. She wore a child's face, but a hurricane of arcane power roared inside her. She was the most powerful mage in existence. A walking encyclopedia of every spell, the living embodiment of magic itself, kept under the nation's supervision. Relief cracked open in the protagonist. He knew the chances of crossing paths with her again were razor thin. They stormed into the room to deliver the box, and his eyes locked on her. There she was again. Lysandra pressed into the gathered group. They sprang to greet him the instant he appeared. He hesitated, afraid he'd barged in, and the girls laughed, insisting he hadn't interrupted. Wild coincidence. They'd literally been talking about the barrel just moments earlier. They beckoned him to stay, and waved Bissell in too, the man standing right beside them. Panic surged through the disciples. Their master already loomed right beside the commander. Back to the main plot, the adventurer squared his shoulders, marched up to the instructor and gathered his nerve to ask a favor. She longed for him to take the new adventurers under his wing and begin training them too. A ragtag band of novices signed on to one impossible job: conquer the dungeon. They had to have a platinum-ranked adventurer by their side to stand a chance, and such champions were nearly extinct now. Lysandra insisted she could handle it alone. This time the situation had flipped. One misstep could throw them face to face with an unknown monster. The magic division demanded a deeper probe into that very dungeon. Odds were razor thin, so the guild insisted they take at least 2 companions as backup. Understanding hit Beryl like a thunderbolt, and he shot back an instant, unwavering yes. He burst onto the training field and urgently asked Eludia to take a break. His disciple had helped him time and time again, so she dove in and poured every ounce of herself into assisting. They tore themselves away with breathless goodbyes and vowed to reunite at the guild later. The commander beckons Thistle to come along, so she might catch sight of something fun. As they left, Alucia gasped. This was unexpected. She'd been sure her master would refuse. This cracked Beryl into a laugh as confidence surged back through him after he'd become an instructor. A grin split her face as she implored him to stay safe on his journey. Guild-affiliated adventurers wielded sweeping authority and faced a relentless torrent of requests they could accept. Ranked by raw power and razor-sharp skill, they climbed the ladder to earn the right to tackle ever deadlier missions. Black was the highest rank. One command from it could snuff out or secure an entire nation's existence. Even among them, Selena Alessandra towered above the rest, her caliber utterly unmatched. 20 years ago, the protagonist stumbled upon her on a riverbank, battered and trembling, the lone survivor of a savage monster attack. At first, his presence clamped terror onto her, stealing even the sound of her name. Minutes tick away, what happens next? One day, a memory slammed into her. She remembered who she was. Years later, the once terrified girl vanished, replaced by a renowned heroine. Beryl stood there, panic flaring as retirement loomed. Even Landred had blasted into platinum. That idiot's probably gloating right now. They burst into the guild. They tracked down their leader Nades and the shrewd advisor Megan. Outrage warped Megan's face, uncannily echoing the exact expression the other had worn moments before. The leader, tipped off by Lysandra and Lucy, summoned the protagonist to aid them. Relief surged through them. He would rush to their aid. The advisor cut in, voice razor-sharp. Someone had vouched for him, but he refused to let a stranger go. The disciple adventurer's patience frayed, and the protagonist's chest tightened with sudden worry. Megan's eyes hardened. His biggest fear was the instructor getting hurt on the way. The guild rested on fragile trust. One scandal could shatter that faith and force everyone to second-guess every decision. Rude? Absolutely. Curiosity tore through Megan's manners. He had to know about his experience. The protagonist launched into a tale of plunging into the dungeon all alone. He froze mid-sentence, his voice snuffed out as silence crashed in and confused faces stared back. He couldn't take down the monsters and bolted on the spot. Ever since that day, he froze at the doorway, too terrified to step inside, and the group stared, incredulous at his cowardice. If that were true, he was a raw rookie, and trusting a man like that would be a blind leap. Lysandra snapped that her master wouldn't die so easily, her words daring Megan to start a fight. Lucy promised, eyes fierce, "Prove your worth and everything will be fine." If he reached platinum or black rank, nobody would dare complain. Even the leader nodded, comprehension sparking in his eyes. He'd grasped their plan. They shoved the protagonist into a brutal showdown against his own disciple. They had no choice but to test his strength, and the whole room fell into unanimous agreement. Even Lysandra crackled with excitement. She couldn't wait to take on her tutor. The rest of the people sank into their seats, eyes locked on the duel. Even the commander cracked a grin and swept Feasel into the most thrilling part of the situation. From the very start, Lucy had seen this moment barreling straight toward her. None of that mattered. The advisor was fixated on one thing, the protagonist's strength. Curiosity ignited. He had to see how he'd handle someone of black rank. Word spread like wildfire. The highest rank an adventurer could seize was the ocean. Many surged into the guild with flames in their chests, but none dared chase the black rank looming above the ocean. That level was leagues beyond anything a mere mortal could reach. The crowd pressed around the duel, roaring as they slapped coins down and placed their bets. They cheered his name and laughed at him, their uproar shredding every scrap of his concentration. Stacked up against classmates like Karuni and Alutia, Doubt didn't stand a chance. Slena didn't compete. She dominated from a whole other plane. At last they bellowed, "Let the duel begin!" The adventurer tensed, muscles coiling like springs, eyes locked as they wound up to strike. She moved like lightning, but the protagonist, he clings to her heels. 3 cuts screamed for attention. Her stance screamed the next strike would land somewhere else. Her prediction shattered within moments, and Beryl's gaze landed on her, slumped and out cold. The disciples unleashed swift, rhythmic thrusts that never stopped. Lucy seized her speed and turned the clash into a long, fierce fight. This adventurer wasn't just a dual-wielding fighter. He blew that label apart. A few years earlier, a dragon ripped through the region, and with no knights left, the guild launched a full-scale extermination mission. Their jaws dropped in stunned disbelief. Wounds sealed and flesh rented itself. The dragon could regenerate. A brand new species surfaced, the immortal dragon, and every ocean rank that confronted it crumbled beneath its fury. Lysandra shattered the stalemate. She was platinum rank at the time. She struck with blinding speed, shredding it faster than its regeneration could stitch the wounds. Her greatest weapon? Unmatched endurance that swallowed every blow and outlasted every foe. In exchange for her chipped swords, they pressed a lone blade hewn from immortal dragonstone into her hands. She moved at blinding speed. It kept swelling, swallowing every gap until nothing remained open. The adventurer clashed with her master, every strike driven by fierce, unshakable resolve. Lucy snapped. Are you holding back? Or are you going to lose on purpose? The idea of him throwing the fight was unthinkable. She didn't fit that mold. The battle had dragged on so long, they were on the verge of calling it off. Beryl absorbed a relentless barrage, blow after blow battering him, yet he refused to fall. Lysandra poured a desperate plea straight into his mind. He swore he'd never fall, never taste defeat. She wanted him to finally confess he'd been miles ahead of her from the very first step. After a heartbeat of silence, the protagonist explodes into action. The blow rockets her sword from her grasp, hurling it spinning through the air. It was the foliage that unleashed devastation. It began as a brutal technique meant to wrench a sword from an opponent's grip, a technique he'd honed to flawless perfection. He squeezed every last ounce out of it, weaponizing everything against his opponents. The protagonist rocketed in and floored his opponent. Unleash the final strike, end this duel. He conceded her newfound strength, pride swelling in his chest. She shot back that she still had a long way to go. At least those who bet on Beryl exploded into cheers, clutching stacks of cash after scoring a massive payday. They tore into Mike's discovery. Mike fell back, fingers already hovering to call the newcomers. When the dust settled, recognition slammed into him like a punch. He knew him, but he'd never admit it. Lucy lunged at Fissel, eyes blazing, and fired. So, what did you think of the fight? Selena wielded a two-handed blade, but every stance and strike screamed right-handed. She lashed out at Les with her left, snapping him into a vice-like hold to seize control. No one would dare pull that move in a fight this frantic. Rage lanced through the mage as they demanded the commander explain why she'd set all this in motion. Was it just for her amusement? She snapped that it was nothing but pure hatred for him. She didn't despise him. She knew those who wield power had to use it responsibly, because after staring him down, Beryl tossed out a line that hit her like a punch to the ribs. Realization hit her. Chasing his life would strip her of any chance to help Fissel. Victory and defeat meant nothing to her. That behavior turned men like him into idle shadows, their drive snuffed out. He might have carved a reputation as an instructor, but that fame wasn't enough. Somewhere, someone would still be crying out for his power. He had to hunt down those people and unleash his name until it echoed everywhere. Even Fissel had to admit it. Moments later, the advisor swept the group into the meeting room. He strode forward and announced the group's arrival. The group set to storm the dungeon this time. Sometime later, everyone clambered into the rattling cart and hurtled toward the dungeon. It still blew everyone's minds that Landred had snatched the dojo master spot instead of Beryl. He'd already spotted the new band of adventurers. They were practically clamoring for a chance to greet him. Beryl's gut told him he'd get along with them. Megan stepped in and officially introduced them. Porta, bronze-ranked, commanded the group. Needly burst into view, their bronze rank flashing, and silver-ranked salicoats gleamed. The newcomers stared at their veterans in wide-eyed awe and gripped their hands like they'd just met legends. The monster they hunted remained unidentified. They didn't even have a single clue to chase. That dungeon was only one of the search areas, so they stalked it like hunters, silent, razor-focused. Every step had to count. Where this dungeon lurks, lurking in the southern reaches of the Azoramia forest, the Greenwich cave gaped like a black maw. Lysandra vowed she'd stay at the rear beside her master while the newcomers surged ahead. Learning was the adventurer's greatest treasure, so the scholars stayed on the sidelines, acting only as their razor-sharp advisors. The monster could strike at any moment. He had to stay razor-sharp. He wasn't the man who'd once turned and run, and he had to protect the younger ones. You heading here now? He lost his footing and skidded across the cave floor. This place demanded razor-sharp caution. Salicots swept the perimeter with sharp eyes, and for now the coast was clear. He had a recognition ring, an enchanted tool that flared into light whenever various living beings gathered. Salicots claimed the seeker spot, needily, while Porta bulldozed through the rest of the work. Barely a moment passed before they spotted several of them materialize. A pack of goblins massed right in front. It looked like they were up to something. They ripped pieces from each other. With danger roaring at their heels, the protagonists resolved to wipe them out. They steeled themselves to dive headfirst into the same old routine. The rookie squad wiped out a lone goblin without breaking a sweat. Lysandra saw their fierce hunger for independence, but a gnawing doubt clawed at her. Did they secretly need help? It shoved the protagonist into deep reflection, exposing their true self as the polar opposite of what they'd appeared to be. The rookies moved in deadly sync. Porta drew every enemy like iron to a magnet and neatly anchored the team with rock-solid support. Silver-ranked Salicots steamrolled the others, his rank putting him a cut above the rest. What do you do when a monster locks its sights and prepares to strike from afar? Lysandra crushed it before anyone could blink. They might have looked weak, but their cunning struck like a hidden blade. Everyone had to stay on their toes. Ribs jutted from their skin, every hollow cheek screaming starvation. Hunger clawed at them. They were probably starving. That meant the cave was swarming with goblins, overflowing every tunnel and crevice. A hulking beast exploded out of the spot they'd found food earlier, attacking them. Maybe the very monster they'd been hunting. Sensing the dungeon's deadly edge, they scrambled to finish the probe and sprinted back to warn the guild. Lysandra smiled. The rookies held their ground, and Porta's rock-solid, razor-sharp calls stole the show. Beryl agreed, and they flowed as one. Perfect coordination. Every move honed to the room's suffocating confines. They tore into the monsters without a second thought. One heartbeat of hesitation, and they'd have been plunged into grave danger. He was unrecognizable compared to the man who used to charge head first into monsters by himself. Needley's gaze slammed onto Porta's arm. It was clearly injured. The boy shrugged it off as just a scratch. She refused to ignore the wound. They clicked, electric camaraderie crackling between them. They watched each other's backs, patching wounds and refusing to let the other fall. Even Salicots snapped they'd always been that way. Beryl didn't have to say a thing. Needley lagged a step behind, and Porto's thoughts slammed into a brick wall. You could tell they liked each other. They were always glued to each other's side. Still, the adventurer suddenly blurted out a frantic apology for babbling nonsense. Despite everything, Lysandra leaned in, aching to hear every twist of the love story. Adventurers swore the dungeon was the first forge that turned boys into proper men. Even Porta, drunk and loose-lipped, would blurt out lines like that. The veterans all nodded at once, unanimous and unshakable. Lysandra burned with ruthless resolve to reunite the couple. She would stop at nothing. Her past screamed never, so when she actually showed interest, it hit everyone like a lightning strike. When they wound their way back, they barked at the rookies, "Stay razor-sharp and never drop your guard." Silence swallowed the area. No reaction stirred, not even monsters, so they pressed on with unnerving calm. The protagonist whips around, every fiber keyed to the moment. The instant a strange sensation shot through him. Not even Salicot's ring stirred when his ring pulsed. He couldn't be right. The shadow loomed colossal. It couldn't have moved that fast. Suddenly, a shadowy silhouette loomed overhead. Beryl's shout cut through the air, a sharp warning. Porta hurled himself forward to shield Needley, and the sight seared into his eyes. The battle-scarred adventurer hurled himself forward to their aid. The chance had already vanished, and the boy was catapulted far into the distance. Every single one of them lay injured. What had just burst into view before them? It loomed, an impossibly strange creature. Wings sliced the air at the front, while lion haunches coiled like springs at the back. A griffin. Lysandra hissed for them to stay absolutely still. That monster was a ticking time bomb. This was the kind the guild had never managed to wipe out. It answers to the name Xenograble. Which of these monster types steals the spotlight? They singled out those judged too difficult to exterminate. Stripped of their humanity, they were branded disasters. Landing a kill on a named target was nearly unheard of. A griffin loomed before them, a living, unmistakable example. Porta froze where the blow landed, utterly still, and Beryl panicked, fearing he might already be dead. If they hadn't ripped into action and hauled him to safety, he'd be fighting for his life. Lysandra launched herself at the monster, blazing ahead as the first to charge. Dove beneath it. Seizing the opening, she darted forward and closed in on the injured adventurer, who still drew breath, clinging to life in critical condition. The veteran adventurer braced, slammed his sword forward and shoved the griffin away. He commanded Lana to support the injured rookie and charged off to crush the monster. Then she sprang into action and executed the instructions. She scooped Porta into her arms and barked for the others to follow her. At that same moment, Beryl squared up, facing. Only the named monster loomed. Lucy's warning slammed into him. Some monsters could actually wield magic. Only a tiny elite handful could actually pull that off. The griffin towering before him stood apart. One of those rare exceptions. A relentless onslaught pinned him, forcing him to crawl inch by inch across the battlefield. Not long after, the tremendous heat devoured his sword, turning steel into glowing slag. Landing the final blow looked impossible. He stood no chance against a griffin's raw, crushing strength. Fine, if that's the case, brace yourself. The protagonist lunged, every muscle on fire, throwing everything he had into killing it. Lysandra thrust the wounded into her companion's care and commanded them to race to the nearby village. Failure crushed her when she realized she'd exposed her master to danger. She didn't just fail to protect the novice. She abandoned them and left the instructor to shoulder everything alone. If she'd bolted sooner, none of this would have come to pass. She can't shake the doubt. In the end, had someone been protecting her again? It slams her with memories of her past. As she hurtled along in a creaking cart, they barreled toward a nearby town, determined to stop there before nightfall. In an instant, the cart exploded into splinters, sending shards flying in every direction. Did Selena's parents lunge and clutch her as chaos exploded all around them? Their lives were snuffed out. All she could do was watch the car plummet, and I shot awake, screaming. She snapped awake in a bed she didn't recognize, heart hammering. A voice sliced through the haze, declaring she'd woken up. Just then, a hulking, terrifying man stormed over and dropped to his knees to check her pulse. Lysandra recoiled, a raw scream ripping from her throat as terror seized her. The truth slammed into him, and he stepped back, letting her rest a little longer. Selena couldn't stomach a single bite for days. The adults were consumed with worry for her, and Beryl couldn't steal a single peaceful breath. He kept a sleepless vigil, staying awake longer to make sure she was safe at night. Shivers racked her frame as the fever surged, flaring hotter with every breath. Everything spiraled out of control, and day after day their fear for what would become of her burned hotter. Beryl sprinted to fetch a doctor who was in town, but her father intercepted and stopped him. He felt his sanity unravel for hauling the doctor into a place like this. Lysandra sobbed for her parents, abandonment tearing through her like a raw wound. Then a steady voice sliced the silence, whispering that everything would be okay as it reached out to comfort her. She shot awake, startled. The man in the room stepped forward and declared, "I'm a doctor!" Fear slammed into her, freezing her in place, until her eyes locked on a barrel loomed on the floor right beside her. Shock slammed into her. The doctor revealed he'd kept a sleepless vigil at her side all night. In the heart of a savage blizzard, he cradled her in his arms and staggered through the whiteout, screaming for anyone to save her. She clawed at their hearts, begging for any scrap of mercy that might spare her life. Lysandra clawed her way back inch by inch, regaining her strength. Eating roared back to life. Someday the girl swore she'd rise and become her master's equal, someone who'd hurl themselves into the fire for total strangers. Meanwhile, Beryl plunged into a savage, no-mercy clash with the Griffin. Chaos raged on, fiercer than ever. Against all odds, the protagonist staggered, crushed under the monster's overwhelming strength and merciless magic. Even with his sight wounded, he pressed on. He refused to flinch. The Griffin shouldn't be able to hunt down the ones who bolted. Beryl's chest swelled. He'd defied his limits and come out shining. When did Lysandra burst onto the scene? She witnessed the exact second the Griffin hurled a crackling bolt of magic straight at her master. His effort meant nothing. The swordsman tore the monster limb from limb moments later. It all came down to the moment just before it was burned to ash. She hurled her sword into her master's waiting hands so he could wield it. It looked like the monster was finally done with the searing heat it wrapped around itself as armor. Reunited at last, master and disciple charged into the fray shoulder to shoulder. They hurled themselves at the Griffin. They etched the exact weak points into their minds, driving their swords to bite where it mattered. Even while they battled side by side, they gaped, each blown away by the other's performance. When the Griffin beat its wings and rocketed into the sky, Beryl snapped to the truth. This was its attempt to strike from afar. In that heartbeat, he hurled his sword aside and smashed it mid-air. They stepped aside, carving out space for Lysandra to snatch it and launch a savage strike. He sent it crashing back to the ground, finally ending the fight. Relief crashed over her, and she unleashed a long, trembling sigh. She bolted upright and tore to her master's side to check his condition. He personally sprinted over to confirm Selena was safe. A wave of relief slammed into them both. They were fine. Everything else fell in line. Only the protagonist's left hand stood apart, which burned to ashes. The sight hit the adventurer like a punchline. He exploded into roaring laughter. They barreled forward, fingers flying to bandage his wounds. He unveiled a report detailing his veterans' apologies. He'd dragged them both through hell, but Lysandra didn't flinch. They roared their approval, hailing the novice for his fearless defense of Needley. Megan reappeared moments later, dropping to a knee to make sure the boy was okay. He strode in himself, gratitude blazing in his eyes, to thank the protagonist for slaying the Griffin. Beryl declared the mission a success thanks to the team's grit. Then his voice fell as he admitted he hadn't been able to fully keep his promise to protect them. Mid-conversation, someone burst in, shouting for the assistant, and he had to sprint off. As he strode away, Megan replayed Beryl's apologies in his head, each word landing heavier than the last. He set the guild ablaze with uproar after they felled a named opponent. The guild erupted as everyone surged through the hall, turning it into a frantic tide of motion. To reclaim the griffin's shattered remains, they struck it down and abandoned the carcass among the trees. Everything there hinged on the relentless flow of goods. People surged forward, flocking to the materials with hungry curiosity. As the business caravan swelled, escorts surged to its flanks, their ranks expanding in lockstep. Slaying a named creature always exploded into legend. That pushed Lysandra to demand they seize the moment, swap outfits and grab a bite. Beryl surged ahead and waited for her, his mind a whirl as he replayed everything that had just happened. She burst into the room, thunder in her voice, barking at her subordinates to get back to work. They barked that even the protagonist had to shoulder the box and march it out before him, and the command hit him like a gut punch. The instant Selena returned, she gaped, bewildered. Why was he working at the guild? He slammed his fist and bellowed to the crowd that Beryl had slain the griffin and deserved their respect. Meanwhile, Porta corners Solicots and demands answers about Landret. He let others snatch every victory from his hands and never rose to ocean rank. His gut screamed it. Beryl was a dead ringer for that guy. At first, dread slammed into him. This was the man who had crushed the great Selena. But when he finally met him and spent time with him, reality slammed in. He just seemed like an ordinary old man. When they shook hands, Porta's gaze landed on the other's palm, every inch covered in thick calluses. He couldn't shake the question. What brutal training had forged him into someone like that? If he pursued strength for fame and conquest, he was chasing a hollow, childish dream. Meeting him hit the boy like lightning. He dove inward, ripping open doubts and re-examining every choice. Meanwhile, the master and his disciple. He slipped away to devour a quick meal while the others kept working. Seizing the moment, the protagonist asked how Selena's life had been after the dojo, and Selena revealed she'd been raised well by her adoptive parents. She burst out apologizing, voice trembling but fierce. She'd always longed to return to the dojo. For 20 years she was swallowed by obligations, never stealing a single moment to see it again. Watching her slip into selfishness at times made my blood boil. Still, Beryl seized it like a prize, calling it a blessing. The mere sight of her alive and healthy sent joy surging through him. He never demanded she rearrange her life for him. She could focus on herself. If she felt like it, the master would light up and rush to welcome his disciple home. They exploded into laughter and ripped through the night, having an absolute blast together. They're roaring with laughter, having the time of their lives, while Megan hangs back on the sidelines, watching the whole interaction from a distance. It hit them. They were like father and daughter. The protagonist barreled back into the barracks. He caught a flash of fury in Alusha's eyes. She demanded to know how he'd been hurt. Relief slammed into me when I heard magic had at least healed it. Beryl lunged at her, words tumbling out. The rookie and Slena had been hurt, but they were safe. She barked, "I don't care." But the lie snapped. Fear surged through her the moment she heard it. It set her master alight with joy. In the end, even amid clashing blades, the disciples never truly hated one another. Rage exploded in the girl. Her master had been wounded by a reckless, impulsive act. Evans, Jean, and Karuni squared off, muscles taut and eyes locked as they readied for a brutal three-way duel. In an instant, the boy was boxed into a corner, every escape route slammed shut. The fight balanced on the razor's edge. One hit would decide everything. Her gaze drilled into his figure. She barely looked like a close-quarters threat, but Evans knew one crushing blow would be the end of him. He hung back, refusing to close the distance. He slammed his blade into the swordswoman's stomach during the duel. The bell screamed, the round ended, and he stood triumphant. Karuni fumed, lightning-hot frustration surging through her. That day she crackled with electric energy, as always. He crouched in the shadows, watching them from a distance. He showed up and found his disciples slumped, exhaustion etched into every face. He skipped any mention of her abdomen and training. He snapped, "You don't look well at all." Alarm flared among them. She showed no sign of illness, and that only stoked their fear. She exploded into a sprint, ripping away any chance they had to check on her calmly. Beryl charged after her to check. The truth hit like a punch. She'd been losing match after match. She shrugged it off at first. Then a vicious streak of bad luck slammed into her life. When they cornered her with the question, Why did she think she was losing? Her mind slammed on one terrifying truth. She hadn't trained enough. They'd learned her patterns and predicted every move. He stayed glued to his opponent, coiled with patience, and struck the moment the opening burst wide. When they stayed out of reach of her fencing, her short stature betrayed her and flipped into a glaring weakness. Since then, every way she imagined to claw her way out of this mess had been bleak. She gripped the only small victory. She could finally spot her own weaknesses. She'd always been a wrecking force up close. Not a single swordsman could ignore it. It turned every rematch with the Order of Knights into a brutal, near-impossible gauntlet. Right now, the smartest move was to keep her enemies under a merciless watch. Beryl beckoned her to join him for a while. He steered her straight to the place. In the soot-stained cottage beside the roaring forge, the blacksmith called home. After the dungeon, Selena hauled him there because his sword had snapped. Karuni shoved the instructor inside, oddly cheerful, a grin that didn't fit the moment. He froze as his gaze landed on a towering horde of swords gathered there. A sudden shout from the man at the counter split the air and yanked his attention. Desperation clawed at him. He needed a dragon scale to brew a cure for his wife, but his pockets were empty and he couldn't afford the guild's help. The blacksmith broke down, tears pouring as the story struck him like a hammer. Coinless, he thrust the choice at the customer. Pick any weapon you want. He poured out a grateful thanks, but inside a knife-like truth jabbed at him. Those rumors calling him a fool were right. A knight tore through the chaos, demanded what the problem was, and the moment he heard her rank, the customer bolted. Confusion coiled in the blacksmith's chest, until someone ripped the truth free and revealed the man had been deceiving him. At long last, Beryl stepped forward and greeted Bardell. A lifetime had slipped between them since they'd last set eyes on each other. Pure joy exploded in him when his master finally arrived in Vartlane. He stormed through drills in the dojo beside Fissel and Kiruni. All three of them were colleagues. When he signed up, he was dead certain you had to be a swordsman to forge a blade. He swallowed his pride, marched up, and asked the younger ones to teach him. Karuni ripped the lid off the scheme, revealing a fraudulent customer who had been preying on his kindness. Even knowing this, anger never flared. Relief tore through him. His wife wasn't sick. He never once suspected anyone. Honesty burned in him, steering every move. Beryl stepped into the shop and his eyes slammed into a sea of swords lining every shelf and wall. His gaze locked onto the spy hander. Curiosity ignited in him. He had to know if it would do Karuni any good. It all boiled down to this. If she wanted to close the gap her short reach left, she had to seize a longer weapon. This sword ruled the open field, but betrayed its wielder the moment the fight turned up close. Her strength screams for a double-handed sword. Wielding one would give her the clear advantage. They dared to test it, hearts pounding as they waited to see how she'd perform. If Karuni snatched up the short sword now, the protagonist would be beyond her reach. The change hit like a tidal wave, and Bardell's chest clenched as he wondered if it would be okay. This clue was just one path among countless possibilities. If she really was a genius, she'd tear through the noise and snag the answer in moments. She left the path she'd always walked and plunged onto a new road, fear exploding in her chest. Getting it to work was a battle all on its own. The instant the swordswoman seized the new blade, they knew she could seize it this time. Elation exploded through her. She grabbed the sword and began swinging it with wild, laughing abandon, even though it screamed danger. Hold up, she snapped it up on the spot. First, zero in like a laser on the single real reason they're heading to the shop. The other day, the blacksmith stopped slain dead in his tracks, and Bardell heard exactly how it went down. Get this. Her master spurned any credit for killing the monster and walked away from the reward. When it was over, the adventurer pressed a final token into the blacksmith's hands. They whispered its name like a curse, the Claw of Zeno Grable. They melted that material down and hammered it into the protagonist's new sword. The day before, Lysandra unveiled a sword that healed itself. Forged from material taken from an immortal dragon, the blade sealed that dragon's undying power in its edge. Backing monster-forged weapons, she burned with curiosity to behold the sword forged from a griffin. Bardell's hand slammed into Karuni's in a firm electric shake. He felt it in his bones. She was stronger than before. Her palm barely closed around the hilt. She'd have to master the new sword's grip. Her arms stretch absurdly far, shorten the guard a bit. A blow to her left side in training left her reeling, and Bardell's trained eye spotted it. Beryl's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe how much he could discern. One handshake from the blacksmith, and he could read the hidden fire in any knight's blood. He analyzed everything. Then it clicked. he saw himself in Karuni, who gaped as the value crashed painfully low. It was only a prototype, so forging it ate up grueling hours at the anvil. Bardell slashed the price, sure the girl would fall head over heels for it. Barrel's jaw dropped when he saw the sword's price. Knights called it dirt cheap. At last they plunged into the tale of the sword forged from a griffin. The blacksmith leaned in, burning to hear if she'd accept it. He'd wield the fang to forge it, and Selina had already paid for it. He was about to forge his first sword from a named monster, exhilaration roaring in his chest. Beryl implored him to stop. He couldn't accept that offer. Shock slammed into Bardell like a thunderbolt, knocking the wind from him. This was unmatched material. Nothing else compared, and he'd earned a reward for every ounce of effort he poured into it. He fell to his knees, tears streaking his face, begging for the sword to be forged. All this time his thoughts raced back to his master. Even back when he was still in the dojo, he obsessively dissected every sword Beryl wielded, reading each blade for hidden secrets. Xenograbal's scorching heat consumed his old sword, reducing it to a puddle of molten metal. And if, by some freak twist of fate, that ability could fall into his hands, the barrel might erupt with power and become even stronger. Bardell swore he'd forge a sword worthy of legend. He vowed to bind its power so only his master could ever wield it. Seeing how fiercely he clung to the idea, the protagonist finally caved and agreed. He accepted and swore he'd move heaven and earth to keep the sword's honor untarnished. They locked hands in a firm, decisive shake, sealing the deal. In that heartbeat, the blacksmith's skill exploded to life, snatching the barrel's latent power awake. Shock slammed into him for a heartbeat. Then he swallowed it and slipped on a calm mask. Memory slammed into him the instant his new creation was finished. He'd step forward, lock eyes, and ask for it to be fetched. Later, Beryl strode in to claim his month's salary. They erupted in gratitude for his dazzling work. To his knowledge, the reward was enormous. That was probably the standard fee for instructors. But back when the streets ran wild like that, it felt absolutely terrifying. That pitiful sum wouldn't even buy a brand new sword. Selina was raking in cash, her bank account swelling by the day. For now, the protagonist slipped onto a quieter street, leaving the bustle behind. Oblivious, he walked on while a hooded figure stalked him from the shadows, who barreled into him. They bolted, but before the protagonist could even blink, he lunged forward and yanked them back. He realized the figure had stolen from him. Instantly, fury detonated inside him. A nameless attacker whipped out a knife and lunged. Both the knife and their hand snapped to a halt as if an invisible force had seized them with effortless precision. Beryl apologized, desperation cracking his voice as he begged for the money back. It was too important to him. At that moment, the figure bellowed, "Let him go!" He detonated a surge of magic, recoiling and squinting as he tried to peer through the blinding light. Seizing the opening, the figure tore through it and fled. Relief hit the protagonist like a thunderclap when his money finally slid back into his hands. Flip the coin, here's the other side. A hooded figure rapped on the door, and a cluster of faces swung it open to greet them. They pressed him, voices sharp. Had Mue actually pulled off any juicy heists this time? The payment collapsed into a pittance, so small they accused her of pocketing their money. Mui snapped, denied the accusation, and barked at the guy to get on with his job. Sparks flew and a fight looked inevitable. One of them snapped, "Don't get mad at a child." That guy reigned over everyone, the undisputed boss, who conjured a quick spell and snatched the money left on the table. The hall was pitifully small, and the boss's brow tightened as he demanded an explanation. The thief shot back, shrugging it off as nothing. He'd just stumbled into a mess. Most importantly, she began to wield magic along the way. And if anyone saw her, they'd snatch her up and sell her as a slave. Mui snapped, "How much more do we need?" The boss barked, 5 million. And the finish line suddenly felt miles away. But she could snatch everything up in a heartbeat and bolt back home. Her hand flew to her chest and she froze as her fingers found something there. Panic flared. Her pendant had vanished. Left behind, she slammed into Beryl. The next day, he still clutched the pendant like it was a lifeline. He headed to work and came face to face with Alucia. Years had stretched between them since they'd last laid eyes on one another. Their conversation swung straight to Karuni. Since then, the girl fought tooth and nail and finally began to make real progress. She still fumbled with dual wielding, but once she mastered it, she'd explode into a far stronger warrior. Curiosity ignited in Alucia. Would Beryl teach her if she also traded her sword? Shame flared across her face. She couldn't desert a sword this important. The protagonist pressed him for his take on the situation. Shock jolted the vice commander, and Beryl caught the worry for Karuni carved into his expression. He shot back that he had only been watching her, nothing more. He watched her eyes drop to the floor, defeat carved into her features after the mission fell apart. Alarm rippled through the others as they stared at her. How had someone who usually radiated light gone suddenly silent? She snapped back to her usual self, bowed her head, and apologized for putting her colleagues through that scare. He probably decided it was better to keep anyone he deemed worthless out of the spotlight, starving them of attention. Relief crashed over Beryl the moment she realized people actually cared that much. Karuni once vowed she'd become a knight who could make anyone smile. Aluxia couldn't deny it. The girl ignited laughter and banished gloom the moment she set foot anywhere. Him's silence didn't hurt a thing. The captain insisted everyone feel comfortable in their own skin. When the vice thundered back into training, the protagonist locked eyes with his disciple and spoke, each word heavy with meaning. Listen, it's about the pendant he stumbled upon. At first, jealousy flared. She was sure it was a gift from someone. He slammed the facts on the table and explained the situation. Meanwhile, Mui bided her time for hours. She tore through the room, searching for her lost belonging. Along the way, a voice sliced through the silence and asked if she was searching for something she'd lost. She whipped around. Shock ripped through her. This was the same person who'd tried to rob her last time. Right then, she exploded into a sprint. Beryl tore after them. He thrust the pendant toward her, voice cracking as he insisted he had it and wanted to return it. The uproar ripped through the streets and snapped the city guards to attention, who shoved the protagonist aside, yanking them away from the child. A sliver of escape yawned open. Mui's one shot to bolt to safety. She froze, hesitation clawing at her throat. This will also burst onto the scene. She froze. Shock ripped through her when she saw her master like this. The moment the guards realized who he was, they scrambled and flooded him with apologies for how they'd acted. Our heroes poured out their thanks for the help. Their conversation snaps back to the thief girl. Word she could wield magic tore through the group, and they marched her straight to Lucy. He barked for them to scrub that flea-ridden child clean. They still held her fast, even as Mayui screamed for them to let her go. The mages swarmed to her side, steadying her and wiping her clean. The care hit her like a thunderclap, dragging memories screaming back into the girl's mind. How she'd faced the same thing before. Beryl blurted an apology for leaving the situation in Lucy's hands, but Lucy just grinned. She was already fired up to fix the magical incidents. Only a handful ever dared use magic to steal. Across the realm, wizards commanded awe and rose to stand at society's very summit. There had to be a reason she kept stealing. Something was driving her back to it. Fresh from the bath, they piled a steaming feast before Mu East so she could fill her belly. They lock eyes and hurl their names at each other, every introduction sparking like a live wire. Lucy leaned in and asked, "Do you want to be part of my house?" She'd breeze into the magic academy. Penniless, yet the country would sponsor her, hone her magic, and she'd empower herself, and countless others. Relief exploded through her. She'd never again have to steal from anyone. When Mayui suddenly jerks back, Beryl snaps upright, concern surging through him. The girl slammed Lucy into their midst and hissed that if anyone dared cast a spell, she'd kill the child. Fissel tenses, every nerve electric poised to burst into action. Her master stops her mid-motion with one sharp, commanding gesture. Realizing the place swarmed with wizards, the thief melted into the shadows. She demanded they take her to the one who could pull the dead back to life. When pressed for the reason, Maiwi's eyes flared as she confessed she wanted to bring her sister back to life. Lucy snaps, "Magic like that? It doesn't exist!" That pushes the thief into a white-hot rage. If it couldn't be done, she'd demand every last cent they owned. This attitude rips away the master mage's blinders, letting them grasp that her demands weren't hers. A third party pulled the strings behind them. Maybe someone told her the magic would only work to revive someone if she paid up. That presumption rips another scream from Maiwi's throat. Rage ripped through him. Wizards were horrible people. He lured her with warm baths and steaming meals, every kindness a calculated trap. She eyed them and knew she was leagues ahead. 5 million stood between her and the sister she'd been torn from. If she scraped it together, they'd finally be reunited. The thief froze, eyes wide, as Lucy bared her throat and let the blade slice across her neck. That dull table knife would barely bite her skin. Nothing more than a shallow scratch. Her breath caught. Magic actually existed that could heal wounds. Since ancient times, even the brightest wizards couldn't wrench the dead back into life. The commander of the magical division saw right through it. The promise to Mui was a naked lie. She plunges into denial, slamming the door on reality. Beryl storms forward to demand answers about this so-called magic. This marked the first time. Thistle watched as her master erupted in fury. When the protagonist finally hands the pendant back, he clung to the hope that it was a last gift from her late sister. That little accessory never left her. It sat against her like a heartbeat, a constant reminder of her mother. One day, that man burst in clutching it. He ripped the silence apart and told Mei her sister had died. From that day on, she toiled in his service, doubt clawing at her. Could it really be true? Beryl thrusts out an offer. Join us. We'll search for your sister together. Her age betrayed her. She could reinvent herself as anyone she dared to be. She didn't have to chain herself to that situation. Lucy cuts in, snapping that the protagonist's face looks downright terrifying. The thief demanded to know where the man she worked for lived. She whispers his name, Twilight, a man who wields a dizzying array of magics and commands a host of devoted followers. Beating him? Not a chance, he was untouchable. Still, the mage throws back her head and laughs. She only meant to stop and talk to him, nothing more. Beryl joined them too. Right when Fizzle registered how bad this was, because her two masters joined forces, they forged an unstoppable juggernaut. Twilight smirked, realizing he'd duped Miyui purely for the thrill. They craved her magic and would pay a king's ransom for her obedience. Too young to doubt him, she swallowed his promises, until she scraped together 5 million. They struck gold when they snatched that child first. They'd barely said her name when someone pounds on the door. Mui burst onto the scene, Beryl and Lucy right at her heels. Twilight's elusive hands prowled the capital, a ruthless band of bandits the city feared. Multiple witnesses swore they'd seen people vanish into thin air, and the truth eluded everyone. In that instant, everything exploded into motion. The boss barked at Luberry, "Throw the door wide for Mayui!" The instant he spotted her with company, he snapped upright and surged forward, poised to press her for answers. A thunderous blast tears open a path and the duo barrels through. Lucy shoved the thief into the protagonist's hands and bolted, refusing to risk getting hurt. She strode in and spoke to them. The boss barked that her entrance had been shockingly rude. That provocation lit a fuse inside him. Twilight barked, "Shut the door!" That let them sever her from Beryl, who suddenly found himself encircled by several snarling bandits. They tore into the thief, hurling vicious insults for betraying them, and surged forward to cut down the child and the old, battle-scarred swordsman. Lucy stormed through the house, neutralizing every henchman inside. Instead of revealing where Mei's sister was, he clamped his mouth shut. The boss hijacks the conversation again. Is he baiting the mage until their patience finally snaps? She rips reality itself with space-distorting magic. Only one person could rip through the spell's grip and break free. He staggered as the magic died away and Twilight's name suddenly erupted onto the list. Defeat wasn't an option. He'd burn through anything in his way to snatch victory. Yet the two crackled with enough power. They squared off, toe-to-toe, both standing on equal ground. Lucy's gaze snapped to the boss's cloak. She knew at once it was no ordinary garment. A magical piece of equipment loomed before them. The Devourer of Darkness. Magi Formationus, a monstrous mutant, repelled every spell engorged on magic itself. Twilight stood swathed in a cloak of the same material from head to toe. Something electric passed between the two wizards. Spellfire slammed together in midair, each blast snuffed out by its twin. The boss barked, "That magic is truly terrifying. Even someone as bratty as she was? Someone could get so strong they'd leave a loser like him eating their dust." Every piece of the boss's gear cost a king's ransom. He even rocked the ring of strength. When did he smash the house to ruins with sheer strength? He lunged and snatched Lucy up. He knew every secret and weakness of the sorcerers. Inside the city walls, their magic withered and they couldn't lift a finger. Inside the residential district, they wouldn't dare drag civilians into danger or unleash spells carelessly. That move doomed the magical commander to a silent downfall, toppled with no one around to see. Her mind ignited, razor-sharp and unstoppable. It blazed like a spotlight of adoration and triumph. Shame cut through the moment. The sun had already slipped below the horizon. Twilight slammed into the sky, dragging the day down into dusk. He spat his catchphrase like a gauntlet and swelled with smug pride. But the mage just laughed. Twilight's mind raced as she hunted down the source of their unwavering confidence in her. Lucy shot back, "He's nothing more than a kid who can't stop parading his toys," and snarled, "Shut up," crushing him back into the boy he was. By now, the protagonist had plunged headfirst into a brutal, no-holds-barred clash. Can you even fathom the raw, savage power of his swordsmanship? He rocketed the hulking opponent skyward. The other bandits gaped. stunned into silence as that weird old man's strength smashed every expectation. Right then, everything exploded into motion. The magical commander ripped a gaping hole in the ground. She sent her opponent crashing to the ground. He crashed into the sewer water, sputtering and reeling, utterly bewildered. Lucy declared it was the old waterway, and water still thundered through it, striding through the sky. She declared that this place was staggeringly vast. The bandit boss bristled. Did she really think she could go all out down there this time? She exploded into laughter at that brazen question. He strutted around, convinced he was superior to the other wizards. Even the girl begrudgingly admitted his skill, just once. She ripped into her own soul and bared magic's raw, burning heart for him to see. Magic erupted the instant magical power was unleashed. A monster's ability, whether it sent the earth shuddering or unleashed blinding beams of light, was magic. They forged magic into a human-made mimic of the realm and called it sorcery. For ages, Whispers insisted they weren't wizards at all. They were sorcerers. Halfway through his speech, the bandit boss lunged at the commander. He lunged, trying to slam her against the wall, but the girl flat out refused to yield. He seized the waterway's flow and bent every current to his command. They recoiled, backing up toward him. Then a stone golem charged in, unleashing a devastating assault. It blindsided him, stealing his breath. Twilight's voice sliced the silence as she demanded answers. Why hadn't his magic devourer shut it down? This time, fate had other plans. He slammed the ring of strength, obliterated it, and walked away without a scratch. Lucy still loomed over him, and he pinned him to the ground with effortless force. The enchanted gear could scatter an opponent's magic to the wind. Utterly formidable. But it only made him immune to magic. Every other strike could still tear him apart. That was his Achilles heel. His sorcery hinged on moving objects without a single touch. Once again, the bandit ripped her stone manipulation to pieces. That was the raw, earth-shattering power his armor necklace unleashed. His accessories tipped the scales in battle. He lunged, aiming to finish her off. They slipped by unnoticed the instant Lucy conjured a perfect copy of herself. She spots the opening, pounces, and blindsides him. A shimmering bubble of water slammed shut around him, sealing him inside. Raging currents slammed into him, and if he kept thrashing, his strength would shatter. With him ensnared in her power, Lucy seized the moment and unleashed a razor-sharp question at him. Users invoke the impenetrable name of the magic-devouring wolf, a curse that rips away and devours their opponent's power. Arrows and bolts ricocheted off him, yet countless foes still swarmed in, desperate to bring him down. Curiosity burned at the mage. He had to know how the monster was brought down. The answer was brutal. Hurl him into a showdown with a sorcerer who'd perfected body-enhancing magic. Dumping magic into muscle is wasted. Only a warrior forged in raw strength can wring real power from it. Twilight's gaze snapped to the captain. She wore a bracelet. That feeling slammed back into him, the same fierce rush he'd felt as a kid. Every time his father staggered home drunk and lashed out without thinking, the same sick, hollow shock ripped through him. He felt a fist, charged with brutal force, hurtling straight at him. He roared, "Lucy, wait!" They dropped the name Helika Freya. That name belonged to Mui's sister, and this time she was ready to spill exactly where she was. She'd vanished. They'd spirited her off to another place, and only the boss knew where they'd hidden her. He'd leap at the chance to prove it the moment they set him free this time. They vowed to bolt from Vartling at that hour and never lay a hand on Mui again. The mage shot down the request with a killer, heart-melting pout. He taunted the man until his fury exploded. She slammed down a flat-out refusal, not a second's hesitation. At the last second, she steels herself and drives the final crushing blow into him. Outside the waterway, an unnatural chill raced through the crowd as the earth convulsed beneath their feet. They had no idea what was about to hit them. Lucy unleashed a knockout punch that finished the job. Before the curtain rose, a shadowy hand pulled the strings. A stranger slid the equipment into Twilight's arms, and every word he spat made it obvious he was tangled up with Helika. The perpetrator dabbled in witchcraft, and the mage suspects someone engineered his silence. Maybe they'll pick that right conversation back up another time. She exhales, certain the chaos outside has been quelled as well. When the dust settled, the finale fizzled into a dull, dragging disappointment. She annihilated the battle without breaking a sweat. Meanwhile, the scene snapped into motion. Beryl tore through every bandit who dared to approach. Did disaster strike as they fell back? They shunned battle, leaving Lucy to hunt down and seize the boss. They fought far more fiercely than we'd expected, but I knew we'd still pull through. A lone voice sliced through the chaos, stopping the fight and hailing their skills. A swordsman strode into view, his face friendly and open, yet a strange air clung to him. He hadn't struck yet, but he already carried a razor-sharp advantage over everyone else. Robury's jaw dropped in raw surprise as he blurted, "Barrels from there too?" The question was so vague it sent the protagonist's mind spinning. A cold dread slashed through the swordsman. He'd guessed Lucy's identity and knew they were in trouble. One bandit roared at his partner, furious that he just stood there watching and didn't lift a finger to help. Told to kill the old man, the swordsman exhaled a slow, resigned sigh and gave a curt nod of agreement. Then he snapped his sword free and sliced down the colleague who'd been barking orders at him. He loathed annoying people. That guy made his blood boil. Another bandit barged in, ready to tear into him over his attitude, and was gunned down too. They stared, firing questions at him. How did he become a traitor? When the bloody scene erupted, Beryl implored Miwi to tear her eyes away. The moment the scene snapped shut, Robury spun around, snapping, "Why are you staring at me like that?" Rage detonated in this protagonist when the man reveled in cruelty right in front of the child. The bandit scoffed, brushing it off as nothing more than child's play. He choked out an apology. He couldn't match him, so he bolted at once. Moments later, captors pounced, seized Twilight, and hauled her off with the rest of the group. Deals sealed. Eludia's grabbing his equipment and guarding it from now on. The Night Division prowled the hideout, scouring every corner until its safety was undeniable. If the higher-ups found out Lucy was roaming the city, it would ignite a storm of chaos. She shrugged it off, laser-focused on tracking down Helica's whereabouts. The commander seized that opening and spun it into a razor-sharp pretext to strike the bandits. Beryl clutched the wooden sword and marched on. Bardell still hadn't finished his work. At that moment, her disciple thrust a training sword into her hands to make up for it. The surviving gang members, battered and bleeding, were hauled straight into the care of the Magic Division. Cuffs were coming for them, but Miwi burned to know what fate awaited the boss. He would dodge the executioner's blade, and the whole group would be dragged in for merciless interrogation about the kidnappings. The protagonist seized the downtime and threw themselves into the group's back-breaking work, hauling, digging, and sweating side by side. Mayui's jaw dropped. This man had to be important, yet he acted like that. It shoved the faces of the other old men she'd met flashing back into her head. They ripped into her with insults every single time. He watched over her like a guardian, putting her safety above everything, and it made her think he was downright bizarre. Lucia's voice rang out. She backed that opinion without hesitation. The guy who bolted turned out to be the robber. He probably wasn't part of the game. The gang always reeked of grime and jittered with restless energy, but he was always spotless and immaculately groomed. The child clung to only a few shreds of knowledge about him. That earned the Captain Swordsman's approval. She swore she'd hunt down the missing sister with everything she had. The protagonist raced back to a place to eat. He somehow picked the absolute worst spot. Two drunks erupted into a savage brawl. Doubt clawed at him. Had he actually been useful during the battle? Mui would be handed over to the magic captain, placed squarely under his protection. Alutia burst back into the administrative building and implored her master to rest. Beryl vowed to come along, froze and did nothing useful, and a hot, humiliating wave of pathetic shame washed over her. Imagine if every mess could be settled with one furious slash of your sword. Suddenly, one of the brawlers drove it hard into the protagonist's back as he was flung through the air. He barked at the other drunk to cool it. No need to take it that far. In a split second, the moment snapped shut before one of them could land a punch. Beryl slammed the attack to a halt, seizing the fist in a vice-like grip, and sent him crashing to his knees. All the protagonist wanted was to nurse a quiet drink, daring them to shove this mess aside. Pinned in their grip, the man erupted with rage when a brazen interloper dared to step between them. When he hurled himself at that barrel, the second drunk slurred. "The right flank!" He snatched up the advice he was given and charged into action. They whipped around, surprise flashing across their face. They kept that tense dance going for a while until the drunk who'd been itching for a fight finally folded and stumbled away. The advice giver's eyes lit up. He clocked that Beryl had an eagle eye for this stuff too. Without warning, the drunk who'd been itching for a fight stormed back onto the scene, brandishing a real sword, and the hero bursts into focus. The story's beating, relentless heart. Next, he seized the sword with his bare hands and stopped it dead mid-swing, a heartbeat before he unleashed the killing blow. The tipsy know-it-all hurled a bottle straight at that annoying old man's head. He showered Beryl with praise. admitting that if he'd gone all out himself, the victory would have been his too. They sank onto a curb after the chaos, and the drunk, slurring with fierce pride, revealed he'd clawed his way up from commoner to knight. A brutal headache hammered him at work, and he drowned his memories in drink. Beryl laughed off being called a fool. Far from it. He'd been raised in the countryside until just recently. He forged swordsmen in his father's dojo, but life beat him down and the dojo kicked him out. 20 years later, the idea of never leaving seized him, but they got shipped off to the city. He knew better than to dismiss the stranger as an idiot. Given time, the man would grind through those hurdles and prevail. He was still a kid. Wait long enough and this problem would crumble into nothing. The drunk slurred that a swordsman is forever chained to his duty. He knew the protagonist hadn't locked himself away. He was quietly steeling himself for the future. Beryl's mind snapped back to his father's words. He thrust the dojo's leadership into Landred's hands. The moment he sent him off to carry out his duty, it hit him. He was finally forced to reckon with himself this time. The girls were surely drinking now. He faltered. Should he stick around? He shot a silent apology at Alicia and Lucy, regret burning behind his eyes. He'd move mountains to drink in their place. When the previous trunk pulled away, he couldn't stop replaying how they'd fulfilled their duty. A stranger swept in to meet him. It was a robbery. They spotted Shuffle slipping back out for another round of drinks. Shuffle barked that he'd already warned him not to show his face when they were out. The girl at his side gasped. "The Knights have seized the Twilight Gang!" Robbery burst out, eyes blazing, declaring he'd met an incredible swordsman in the heart of the chaos. He might not even look like a knight. Who's to say what lies behind that appearance? He could eclipse Shuffle's power. The thought slammed into him. This was devastating news for them. The trio shot out, sprinting to meet two others. She smirked, cold as a blade. It's only a matter of time before the magic division unearths every secret. Even Robari had already written the leader off as dead. He thought that would have been better. Exactly as planned, Shuffle swore they'd take Twilight down. Lucy cornered the game leader and unleashed a rapid-fire barrage of questions. All eyes snapped to Helica, where she is right now. Every time he tried to speak, his words choked and died in his throat. He wound up slammed to a halt by a bizarre twist. He lunged in and cracked him across the face to jolt him awake. They chalked it up to sorcery. A silencing spell clamped over his mouth, shutting down any chance he'd spill secrets and slamming him into unconsciousness. Lucy could rip it out, but she'd need every pair of hands she could muster, or he'd shatter. They pulled back to base, finishing every last preparation so they could surge back the moment they were ready. Their hearts screamed to bring him along, but moving him even a little would be reckless. Meanwhile, Alucia was charged with hunting down the rubbery. He stepped up to accompany the girls and hoisted their luggage onto his shoulders. He even lavished Fissel with that same kindness. She snapped no and refused on the spot. She bristled, and the captain's curiosity flared. Had they clashed before? He couldn't remember. The mage seethed for reasons no one knew. The vice-captain's mind snapped to training. She ducked, darted, and slipped past several of her attacks. Fizzle snapped back, roaring that the claim he couldn't handle her magic was a lie. She despised losing. Rage boiled in her veins and a sour mood clung to her like a storm cloud. Lucy laughed. In a heartbeat, he'd forged a powerful enemy. The young mage swore he'd accept nothing less than an absolute flawless victory. Her flame blade roared with power, forged by her relentless razor-sharp swordplay. The vice clenched his jaw and grudgingly agreed. He refused to accept defeat without a fight. A jaw-dropping twist blindsided the Twilight Guard. A hooded figure shot forward and slammed the two sentries guarding the cell into the ground. At last, the door swung open. He strode in and declared himself the bishop's envoy, and the gang leader sagged with relief at his lightning-quick arrival. The old man swore he hadn't told the order a thing, then hurled a spell that left the other man helpless. Even though every fiber of him screamed to bolt, the silhouette lunged, driving its sword into him. That slammed into Twilight, sending her reeling. But soon, she'd hunt down her old lackeys. Kiruni barreled in. She skidded to a halt and spotted the bandit's body sprawled on the ground. Other knights erupt, bellowing that an intruder has breached the halls and demanding everyone gather in the underground prison. Reinforcements were about to arrive, so the girl barked for the figure to surrender. The two slammed their swords together with a thunderous clang, sparks flying as the battle erupted. Squeezed into that claustrophobic space, her massive blade tilted the battlefield in her favor. He latched onto the ceiling with one hand, hauling himself up to steal a sliver of space. They ripped back, rocketing farther out of reach. A cold resolve ignited in Karuni. She had to put things right. She careens across the floor. A voice rips through the air, screaming, "Duck!" The vice commander barreled in to help her. He slammed his sword against the intruders, sparks exploding on impact. He clung to that strike by a thread, and his opponent just stood there, totally unfazed. After confirming her colleague was safe, she barked at him, "Get Twilight to the infirmary, now!" He'd single-handedly take down the hooded figure. The silhouette catapulted over the wall, desperate to escape. Several nights later, they finally discovered her. The group barreled down the staircase after her. They were trapped. No way out on that floor. They slammed the intruder into the wall, pinning her as they barked, "Drop your weapon!" They didn't see it coming. The figure hurled itself out the window. They tore across that floor, desperate to flee. A fall like that spelled certain death. The hooded figure slipped through their fingers and melted into the shadows. He swore he'd never let him vanish from sight. He shouted to the others he'd tail him while they saddled up to drive him into a corner. By a freak stroke of luck, he caught the strategy, and no one could believe he walked away from those attacks unscathed. The escape stretched into a brutal marathon, devouring hour after tense hour, until the silhouette wielded barrels. They lunged to hinder the vice captain. He crashed into the barrels and ripped them aside to keep the civilians on the street from getting hurt. That didn't stop him. He barreled ahead. He slammed his hand down and swore to the owner of the barrels he'd pay for every last bit of the damage he'd caused. Even the hooded one gaped, disbelief clawing at him. This night was human. He bolted straight into a trap that practically screamed ambush. Inside, the residents froze, gaping at the wreckage and the strangers storming through their door. He choked out an apology for the destroyed furniture. And they sprinted after the man, relentless. Halfway up, he slammed his foot onto a step and clutched his ankle. They flung him through the window, knocking him flat. The hood slid away. At last, the figure beneath was unmasked. I ripped into the vice captain for being unbearably persistent. Earlier, Shuffle had implored them not to kill a knight. Doing so would let the Order strangle their plans. Make them believe Twilight died the instant she was discovered. Let them swallow that final lie and think it ended right there. If the assassin's getaway unraveled, he must never, no matter what, cross blades with those two names. The very first warning to stand down blasted out from the vice commander of the Order of Knights. He drilled his subordinates. Toughness clung to him like battle-forged armor. He pushed the guys until they gasped for air, ravenous to train them. It twisted the whole experience into a brutal, teeth-gritting slog. He wrote them off as green in battle, while they were itching to test daring new tactics. He dared to ask himself, could brutal, relentless training alone let him close the gap to Eludia and Fissel? Frustration flared in him. Thinking about those things would lead him nowhere. Karuni burst in to thank Beryl for the work, catching him smack in the middle of training. He watched him still pushing himself and was blown away by the sheer ferocity of his effort. He'd sprinted shoulder to shoulder with the knight until his lungs burned and he staggered, utterly spent. He snapped a match between his fingers and thrust it toward him. Take it if you want. They slammed their wooden swords together, a sharp clang tearing through the quiet, and leaned hard on the other watchers, crowding them with relentless pressure. When the training finally fell silent, Beryl's eyes snapped to the hesitation. His opponent had frozen mid-fight. His mind had drifted to other things. He should have known brawn alone would fail. The moment an opening flashed, he smothered it with overthinking. The protagonist extended a lifeline, one more chance. A flash of clarity cut through his panic. There might be another way out. The vice captain's eyes shot wide. Visibly exhausted, the instructor still demanded another round of training. Curiosity blazed in Beryl. He had to try to help him too. He couldn't let this chance slip away. Clarity hit him like lightning. In the end, everything was fine just the way it was. If that pulled off the outcome he'd been banking on, he'd light up. Back in the present, the battle raged on. Karuni refused to be defeated. The hooded one was an assassin who infiltrated Liberio. He wasn't any ordinary man. They couldn't let him slip through their fingers. If he escaped, he'd stray from the path to Helica, and failure wasn't an option. The vice commander froze. His thoughts were already snowballing into overthinking again. His focus snapped to the intruder. Every fiber of his being burned to capture him. They exploded back into combat, fury flaring as they collided once more. Horror ripped through the ugly old man as the sword slammed into his arm and wedged itself there, refusing to come free. A formidable opponent loomed. His strength dwarfed that of any human. The hooded figure froze, disbelief ripping through him. He'd actually come face to face with a monster like that. In a lightning-fast blur, He slammed him to the ground, crushing his claim. If luck had betrayed him, he'd have run straight into someone far worse. The instant a bone snapped, he lunged, seizing the chance to force him into submission. He still had recovery magic at his fingertips. That night, his leg took a savage blow. It opened a sliver of time, and he ripped himself free from his grasp. It got brutal. His injured leg turned every step into pure agony. He couldn't give chase. The intruder never imagined cutting through the alley would slam him face to face with another person. That was the one person he dared not cross. Alutia Stitris. The assassin refused to die in a place like this and made a desperate break for it. One moment alive, the next, felled in the blink of an eye. The commander blitzed ahead, faster than the eye could follow. Her blade drove him flat to the ground as Alutia snapped that he'd be arrested. The moment arrived. The man bit down on the tiny pill. That detonated into a deafening explosion. He barreled in to check the situation, and relief crashed through him when he saw his superior standing unharmed. He seized the cursed relic and snuffed out his own life. The deputy's voice cracked as he apologized for letting him slip through his fingers and failing to stop him before it was too late. Irritation died on the captain's face as he darted forward, checked him for injuries, and barked for a casualty count. Relief crashed through her. No one had died, and she only pleaded that her support be cared for. Later news exploded that assassin Giambi had shuffled off this mortal coil, but they still tore Twilight down. At Robury's flank, the knights unleash relentless, merciless strikes. His self-sacrifice blazed with nobility. He was certain his lord would usher him into the afterlife. Shuffle bristled with irritation and barked at the two to shut up. He knelt at the shrine, arranging an offering for the departed Giambi. He pressed a terse order into the courier's hand. Tell the bishop to be ready to flee at a moment's notice. Surprise slammed into Robury. They hadn't even paused to pick a direction. It was a sudden, spur-of-the-moment choice made purely on impulse. A cold knot formed in his gut as the old man knew something terrible was about to strike. We plunge back into Moody's memories. She watched her sister vanish into the night more and more. The sister said someone had introduced her to a new job. Halika's relentless labor secured warm loaves on their table every single day. It ignited a fierce resolve in the younger girl. She swore she'd grow up fast and stand by her sister. Then Twilight's voice hit her like a thunderclap. She had died. He thrust the pendant into her palm and breathed a final goodbye. But Maui's eyes flared, disbelief burning as he flat-out refused to believe it. Rage boiled in her veins as she screamed, "He's a liar!" Magic burst from her body like a shattered seal, leaving everyone reeling. She's yanked back into the present, snapping awake from the dream after talking to her older sister. Barrow arrived at Lucy's house and stopped dead, jaw dropping at how enormous it was. The commander didn't call him the Magic Division. He bellowed Andaluthia at him right there. They froze. If another guest walked in now, it would spark instant awkwardness. Lucy winced and blurted, "Sorry for calling you here out of nowhere." I sweep my arm toward the seats and implore them to sit down. A shadowy stranger loomed among them, but hold up. Before I introduce him, one last thing demanded our attention. The case screamed robbery. Alusha leaned in and demanded every detail of his experience with a man like that. His instincts screamed, this guy could be a rapier wielder. He strode in with a longsword the day they met, gripping it in a battle-ready posture that wasn't the usual way anyone carried one. He scrambled to explain the strange swordsman's appearance, but his memory betrayed him at every turn. His story exploded into the sword's thunderous roar. They shoved the Helica issue aside and finally unmasked who was behind the enchanted equipment. Before them stood Bishop Levios Sarleoni, the iron-willed leader of the Church of Valtrain, and the living voice of the faith of Sven. The faith deified Sven as the one undeniable god. The stranger ripped the silence with his name, Father Ivroy, and revealed he'd been summoned by the bishop, his superior. They zeroed in on odd little details that set off screaming alarm bells in their heads. At first, unidentified corpses were hauled onto the church grounds. In a capital choked by slums, this was routine. Folk whispered the bishop alone handled the bodies. No one else ever laid eyes on them. No one knew what happened to those bodies, and Helica could be lurking just out of sight. The magic devourer of Twilight, a sacred relic, was ripped from the church long ago. With the others seized, no petty thief could buy it. Then they uncovered an unnatural surge of transactions pulsing through the church. Twilight hawked bodies for cold cash. Why did they hoard all that knowledge and never lift a finger? Then Ivory revealed herself. No one could brandish concrete proof for those claims, and that empty void of evidence became the crushing dilemma. Maybe the bishop had masterminded everything, or they'd jumped to conclusions. Panic seized them. They couldn't predict how the church would answer those accusations. Pinning the bishop down now was next to impossible. It could ignite brutal clashes between the two nations. With no options left, they rounded up witnesses and thrust them into the spotlight to testify. This would demand time. For now, they'd march to the palace and demand the royal family seal the borders. Even after they told him he'd nailed it? Frustration seethed within Beryl. Elsewhere, the church of Valtrine held its breath. Moy clenched her jaw and resolved to check the situation herself. We slipped inside with frightening ease, far easier than anyone had expected. She had no idea what fate was about to unleash on her life. He realized with a jolt. The protagonist was doing the exact same thing. They came face to face, a scream snagging in their throats. Beryl's instincts screamed. He knew at once the girl had been eavesdropping on the group's daytime conversation. She blurted it out. Yes. She was burning to find her sister. It only made sense if she pulled the strings, and she never cared who had to take the fall. When she needed someone and everyone proved useless, Mayui steeled herself and tackled the problem alone. Now it hit her. She was utterly useless. If she'd raced faster and ripped the magic awake sooner, Helica might have been at her side. For her family, she'd steal, she'd invade, she'd do anything to keep them safe. Frustration clawed at Miwi. She loathed being that slow. Then, tears streaming, they pushed on. She pleaded with the protagonist, desperate to save her sister. She asked. He vowed to help her launch the invasion. Surprise flared as she realized she could pick locks, a trick Twilight had drilled into her back when she was in the game. She'd have to go in alone. Even if the protagonist trailed her, he couldn't stay hidden. If things fell apart, she'd cry for help, and Beryl agreed. At that instant, the girl burst into the place and slipped through like a shadow, unseen. It looked brand new, a church thrown up as a disguise to slip past prying eyes, smack in the heart of her passage. She pressed herself flat against the wall and melted into the shadows as a girl walked past. My wee buzzed like a sixth sense. She was a knight, and a sentinel parked right there spelled nothing but bad luck. She spun to snatch the supposed intruder. Then someone called to her. Beryl screamed a warning that the lights had gone out. He did it just in time. He watched the knight stride in first, and fear for Meiwi hit him like a punch. A golden opportunity slammed into view. Now she could plunge even deeper into the church. That night at the church, he bluffed his way in as the event's sponsor, and they greeted him like a VIP. He stalled, buying the intruder time to try and dig up more information. Her eyes snagged on Beryl's blade. She knew a swordsman when she saw one and beckoned him into the church. He shot it down. Her insistence slammed into him, leaving him stunned. He rolled with it and leaned in as the knight dropped the bomb. Sven had originally been said to be a human swordsman. Every church knight wielded a blade forged to mirror Sven's own sword. He charged into battle for the powerless, mended the wounded, and dragged the dead back to life. He banished the terror of death and granted salvation. Many believers flocked to worship him. Even that girl stood frozen, utterly mesmerized. She'd snapped, utterly unhinged. Two men barreled into the church, and the moment their eyes met the protagonists, recognition slammed into them like a punch. A robbery exploded into the room and Beryl froze. He suddenly recognized the robber. In a flash, the swordswoman snatched up a piece of furniture. She lunged, almost bashing him while he stood distracted, rage tearing through her because he'd stomped into her lord's house with filthy feet. Blades clashed as the swordsman exploded into battle. Beryl was outmatched. The odds were stacked against him. The three who'd gathered snapped into stance, muscles coiled and poised to fight inside. Did fury consume Euro? Robbery urged her to calm down a bit. You'd pick a fight with an old man like that? The three braced, ready to unleash everything they'd got. The battle erupted, every clash and cry carving the air. Mui forced her way into a room jammed with coffins. She remembered Ivaroi saying people whispered the bishop was hunting the miracle of resurrection. They refused to credit their lord with miracles. To them, every miracle was just the fierce, undeniable surge of healing. Resurrection reigned as the ultimate power, and Lucy flatly declared that such a capability could not exist. Believers and practitioners, everyone desperate to see their lost loved ones again, fought tooth and nail to make that reunion real. To recreate the miracle, the bishop would have to commandeer corpses into the ritual. Mui stared at the coffins, pulse pounding. Could one of those really hold her sister's body? Her fingers were inches from them when a masked figure snapped, "Stop!" and demanded what a child like her was doing in that place. She spun around, eyes wide, blurted a hurried apology, and confessed she'd gotten lost. The bishop swept into view, a heavy sigh trailing behind him. He barked at Shuffle. "Take her to the back!" The masked man's eyes flared. He knew her name. His support units had already relayed the intel straight to him. Twilight claimed a red-haired girl as her own. At that very moment, Moy detonated a blinding storm of magic. He barked, "Stay away!" Shuffle lunged and froze her before she could blink. They barked to Lovios, "Flee now and burn every scrap of evidence." But rage boiled in the bishop's veins. They were inches from victory and still had to obliterate every last trace of this. They'd snagged results, and at least they could return to their home country and plunge back into the research. They'd snatched the girl, too. Her magic made her a prized test subject. Levius roared, "Rise, all of you trapped in those coffins!" It was obvious. They were coming to snatch them away. They were nowhere near finished, yet they still sprang to life. That instant ignited the miracle that would forge their legend. Meanwhile, events began to unfold. Inside the church, the Battle of Beryl still raged, chaos reverberating down every aisle. Euro intones a prayer, pouring fierce support into his colleagues. In no time, the trio's strength exploded, their blades dancing with lethal precision. The church knights were an order sworn to serve Sven's faith directly. Renowned for razor-sharp sword thrusts, they drove their blades through the chaos, striving to bestow miracles. Only a handful of knight orders could wield both of these abilities. The protagonist refused to back down, summoned the courage to face it head-on. All three surged as one, ghosting past every strike. Their jaws dropped as his skill ripped through every expectation. He thrust the sword's sheath up and blocked the strike. He landed a clean, dead-center blow on one of the swordsmen. Staring down that reaction capability, what move will they make? Robbery roared, "Fall back!" They had zero chance of winning. The protagonist surged onward, utterly unstoppable. Storming Euro next, he knew in an instant she alone among them could summon miracles. The trio of swordsmen stared into the jaws of defeat. Defeat swallowed them whole like nothing they'd ever faced. Until the masked man hurled himself into the heart of the fight. Steel screamed as he locked blades with Beryl. Two titans clashed in a brutal showdown of raw strength. Even the protagonist staggered as recognition slammed into him. He knew his opponent. It hit harder when stacked against his disciples. The bishop personally handpicked each church knight. No worldly rank, no grand titles, but every single one was undeniably qualified. Even Ivory shrugged it off as a mere rumor. Yet hidden in those whispers lurked a man nicknamed the Night Hunter. Years ago, a lone figure set their sights on the church order and single-handedly obliterated an entire division. They labeled it an incident at first, then a cold certainty struck them. This wasn't the handiwork of any organization. He walked away from acting, and the rumors about the hunter faded to whispers. Still, everyone knew he'd been a fearsome opponent. Face to face now, Beryl stared him down as cold certainty hit him. This man was the hunter. Shuffle cracked a grin and shot back, "I knew it was you all along!" Sound slammed into his armor and died, leaving the protagonist straining to hear. The knight's captain barked at Uro. "Get the bishop into the carriage and flee!" He had to take the child with him. Even unconscious, the instant she woke, she'd unleash magic. The protagonist recoiled. They braced themselves, poised to bolt out of the church too. One heartbeat, his only shot to slip past Shuffle's lunging thrust. He blindsided the captain with a bombshell. Beryl had actually done such a thing. He'd never set eyes on him until that moment. They locked eyes, fury ignited. Each swore to crush their opponent. While the battle raged, Euro and Robury seized the chaos and bolted from the fray. Their swords collided in a shower of sparks, ringing through the air again and again. Shuffle rooted himself to the spot, refusing to give an inch. He bent and twisted with uncanny ease. From any stance, he launched relentless assaults, leaving Beryl scrambling to read his movements. His thrust shot forward like a coiled spear, utterly lethal. He tore forward with inhuman speed, a blur that made escaping him almost impossible. Shuffle had known the protagonist for years. He felt his powers thrumming beneath his skin, and knew exactly what he could do. So he hurled his sword, steel screaming as it tore through the air. The captain's mind raced, hunting for the next move. Several people smashed through the church's glass windows and stormed inside. Both were blindsided, shock ripping through them. Beryl froze, heart hammering. Could they be reinforcements? Unarmed, they looked every bit like ordinary civilians. Shuffle erupted, ripping into the stupid old man for butting in. At the bishop's command, those people surged forward to attack the protagonist. Right in the heart of the chaos, a girl stood, small, fierce, impossible to ignore. It looked like Miwi. He peered closer and his blood ran cold. A thunderclap of recognition ripped through him. He realized it was Helica. It all came down to the moment Beryl, before he stormed the church, cornered the girl, and demanded to know about her sister. She blurted out to him, "Helica is beautiful!" A smile was glued to his face. He always put her first. Even at the bitter end, she clung to one desperate thought, the younger one's safety. The protagonist now lunged, desperation fueling a frantic shove to drive the older sister away, but rocketed skyward and hurtled miles away. Their strength was jaw-dropping. He realized they were all fueled by the power of a miracle. Earlier, when his fingers brushed Helica, her body was ice-cold against his skin. A cold punch twisted his gut. At once he knew everyone there was dead. Lucy warned us about a magic that could make corpses march. Not something any fool could wield, but a deadly art that demanded iron control. The memory hit. Muyi had been consumed by a fierce longing to see her sister. Pain ripped through Beryl's heart. Meanwhile, elsewhere, events surged onward. Shuffle shot through the window and left him standing there. That morphed into a massive problem. Beryl had absolutely no clue. How do we put those walking corpses down for good? Coerced into launching a savage assault, they slaughtered them. By the book, it counted as round 2. It took barely a heartbeat for the truth to slam into them. Their hearts betrayed them. One strike and they crumpled. Each of them carried a unique weakness, forged by the exact way death had claimed them. Beryl shoved the thought aside and dove into his task, every nerve locked on the job. He held back, coiling like a spring, until he had no choice but to strike Helica. Even as the final curtain fell, it still only seemed that way. She swore she would protect her younger sister, no matter the cost. With the last zombies down, Beryl bolted after the man who'd slipped away. He heard voices scream that the flames were spreading. They should scour the land for water. He barreled past, eyes scouring the crowd for Miwi. The promise he'd made to help her slammed back into him. A swordsman answers to only one master, duty. Earlier, a drunk at the bar snapped a reminder right at him. A crushing weight of responsibility slammed down on him, and now it would slam into existence. A flash drags him back to his father hunting wild boars, the man who barked at him to stop. Every muscle screamed as his body crumpled under the sheer strain of so much effort. His legs blurred as he tore down the street, desperate to snatch the kidnapped girl back from danger. Beryl crumpled to his knees, exhaustion ripping through him as he fought for breath. A voice inside him dared to name his weakness, and he wrenched himself upright. He clutched his promise to protect others like a lifeline and spat that he was useless. He wrenched himself upright and sprang into action to help the girl, until he came face to face with his disciples on the way. Thistle shot out a hand. They gripped the horse and tore off after them. The sword-wielding mage channeled a blast of magic into her blade and bellowed, "Follow the light!" The protagonist snapped, "How did you even know this was happening?" Alucha, fear clawing at her for her master, begged Kiruni to race to the church. The magical division would join forces, Thistle shoulder to shoulder with them. Shock slammed into Kiruni when the instructor charged in alone. Alucha wasn't the target. She knew he was the kind of man who would storm straight to the end. The moment the news slammed into him, Beryl's grin cracked wide, gratitude surging through him. Then the knight slid something into his palm. This was Slena's last gift to him. Bardell forged a custom relic to unleash raw strength in him, crafted for him alone. At last, Xenogribble's sword gleamed, finished, razor-sharp and primed for battle. Just before he handed it over, the blacksmith barked a warning. "It's still not properly adjusted." He thrust it into Kiruni's grip and charged him with delivering it to its new bearer. Not perfect, but they had bet on it. This was a magnificent sword. Now that the protagonist's fingers clenched around it, gratitude ripped from his throat. Back on Robery's side, the scene snapped into focus. Regret seared them as they fled the city. Out of nowhere, a figure hurtled down and seized the carriage. Their eyes snapped to it. It was Shuffle, and surprise slammed into them. The man barked for them to quicken their pace. The journey could go wrong. The bishop thundered his praise, declaring the work nothing short of brilliant. The captain leaned in, eyes ablaze, and demanded to know why he'd done it. He'd never heard him vow to unleash the undead right in the middle of the church. Levius caught wind that Shuffle had faced that opponent before, a brutal, worthy obstacle. Shame clawed at him for abandoning them, but it no longer mattered. The resurrection hurtled toward its finale. When they finished, more lives would be saved. And the captain's wish was now within arm's reach of coming true. Even with those words echoing in his ears, Shuffle lunged forward and clamped his hand around the old man's throat. He smirked, admitting his earlier opponent, like the revived one, proved a brutal, worthy obstacle. They wrapped themselves around the barrel and held fast, stealing a few precious seconds. Fury exploded in Shapul when the bishop casually treated the dead like disposable tools. Maybe he'd transform him into one of them and feel it pulsing in his own veins. That was all it took. Euro snagged his attention. If he killed him now, every experiment, every breakthrough would vanish in a heartbeat. Sven and Luffy were never coming back. That convinced him to release the bishop, quelling the inferno of his fury. Barrel must have exploited their weakness. Their bodies lay in his wake. Livio's stayed stone cold as the miracle's traces vanished, leaving not a single scrap of proof or clue. They tore toward Svenjardvanya, bound to arrive long before anyone could catch them. The captain knew the swordsman they'd met earlier would hunt them down. Which city they landed in changed nothing, or how many men he'd have to slam into the dirt just to find Mayui. The bishop scoffed. This struck him as pure absurdity. It didn't matter. Shuffle knew him like the back of his hand, because Barrel's duty demanded it. In that instant, a figure slammed down onto the carriage's roof. They whipped around. They froze as a girl burst into view, sword gleaming in her grip. She flourished her blade. The saddle burst loose and the carriage spun wildly. She pounced the instant an opening appeared, unleashing a brutal strike at Rubbery. Euro launched himself at her first, who charged into the fray to fend off the attacks. Her power crushed the robbery and sent it barreling deep into the forest. Right then, Thistle lunged and snatched He snatched her up and barreled through to the other side. That move let them surgically split the opponents. Shuffle saw through the gambit. They meant to stop their miracles from linking, and as his team braced, he felt the thunder of the main force closing in. He barely had time to blink before Barrel stormed into view. Their battle erupted anew. Kuruni and Robbery collided in a brutal sword duel, blades screaming and sparks flying with every savage strike, plummeting the whole time, echoing Fizzle and Euro, whose magic detonated everything it touched into roaring explosions. 3 fights erupted side by side, raging all at once. Brace yourselves, we're about to begin. Long ago, a girl was trapped by starvation, hunger gnawing at her bones. She forced down stale crusts and meager scraps they tossed her, every bite a desperate battle. A voice sliced the silence, demanding she join hands and pray to Sven, for her God watched and heard everything. Without it, the blessing would never fall on them. The child crashed to his knees, hands clasped, begging to be let out. The guards howled, mocking her defiance. They sneered as she clawed and fought just to stay alive. Everything had been holding, then the world snapped awake. The prison walls crumbled, and the girl lunged through the gap toward freedom. She lunged into the sunlight as the guards thundered after her. Breath caught, they watched her face shift and the wounds knit shut. An absolute miracle. Elsewhere, another girl reveled in luxury, pampered and hailed as a genius. Both her masters roared their praise, and people pinned sky-high expectations on her. And now these two girls face off. Euro and Fizzle tore into each other, trading brutal blows. Their powers slammed together, ripping the air apart in a storm of thunder and sparks. They unleashed a jaw-dropping battle combo. Even though the religious one lay wounded, she summoned a fierce prayer and healed herself. She crackled with magic, a storm of power so vast it warped the air around her. If Thistle dared compare, she'd insist she nearly matched Commander Lucy. Euro snarled, branding her opponent vile for ripping her out of prayer. She invoked a sacred rite before battle, a decisive ritual that steeled her for the coming clash. They lock horns as magic and miracle collide, their ideologies exploding with every strike. At last, the truth crashed over them. They couldn't understand each other. Their attacks slammed together in a thunderous clash. The knight's cuts hit their mark. But everything screamed superficial, glittering on the outside, hollow at the core. Thistle met no resistance. Her opponent's advanced magic hit her like a terrifying bone-deep blow. If she kept slashing her, she'd bleed to death. Against magic, the knight's defenses crumbled. Euro already knew he'd never outclass her technique. She gritted her teeth and forced her other ability to kick in. Her opponent's sword turned into a leaden anchor, sagging in their hands. That opening let her lunge, aiming to impale Fizzle. She parried with the same sword, felt a crushing weight, and realized the heaviness wasn't hers. Sure enough, a weakening spell slammed into it, draining its strength. Bit by bit, her limbs turned to lead until she could barely lift a finger. Shock ripped through the pious woman. The girl was still parrying every one of her strikes. It still tipped every fight in her favor the moment she raised the sword. Exactly as you'd all suspected. She funneled every scrap of magic into her arms to wield the sword, sacrificing the use of every other spell. Magic came straight from frantic scrawled copy notes. To call them forth, you had to hammer the strokes again and again, writing non-stop in one fierce, unbroken rush. Wielding two magics at once felt like snatching a pen in each hand and writing with both hands. Assumes a Euro-spatialized guise only in miracles. She shrugged off every bit of it like dust. She crashed to her knees before Sven, pleading like a destitute woman born with disease and tossed aside. Faith snatched her from the jaws of despair, and she reached toward the heavens, praying for a new blessing. Thistle gritted her teeth, fighting to keep the strength swelling in her arms as she barely held on. Her adversary tapped a bottomless well of magic. It hit like déjà vu from that fight with him. Nearly the exact same battle. Her magic drained dry and the battle died with it. Though they'd warned her not to get hurt. The mage's resolve crumbled. He couldn't hold back. The vice commander wielded brutal strength beyond the norm, just like Karuni, and the moment their magic ran dry, there was nothing anyone could do. None of it meant anything. To Fizzle, she stood as the disciple of the realm's mightiest mage and deadliest swordsman. She worshipped her masters like gods, her devotion burning so bright it blinded her to everything else. Failure gnawed at her until she snapped, collapsing into a storm of tears. That's why, come what may, defeat dared not touch her. The sword clattered from her hand. Euro staggered, utterly blindsided. Shock ripped through her. She realized it was just a distraction. He lunged, driving a strike straight into her chest. The mage swordswoman channeled raw power into her blade and bent it to her will. Right in the heart of a storm of blades, steel screamed and sparks rained down. One of the faithful sustained an injured eye. It blinded her. That opened the chance for Fizzle to pounce and strike her from behind with a savage blow. Even pinned against the wall by her opponent, she burned with defiance. The mage swordswoman erupted a blade from inside her opponent, slicing them from within. She blacked out before she could unleash the miracle. That moment slammed shut the fight between the two women. Roberet's old training betrayed him, and Giambi snatched the win. That happened because they asked him to wield the miracle even during training. Rubbery's fighting style isn't for show. It's built for real fights, and would dominate once the punches start flying. Elsewhere, the exact same instant struck. Shuffle sparred with trees, using their trunks to forge his skills into steel. Whispers spread like wildfire. He couldn't pull off miracles. His limits were laid bare. Against all odds, he blasted his way to the top and became the benchmark everyone scrambled to match. Shuffle burst into laughter, scoffing at himself. He was convinced he wasn't even close to being good. He knew he was worlds apart from the knights on the other side. To Rubbery, it registered as nothing but a phantom flicker in his head. He'd always carved knights into two stark breeds. The first were warriors who lived by the sword, knights who clenched steel and carved out their survival. Shuffle almost never stumbled upon anyone like him in the second group. It was a band of warriors who lived for the blade, utterly mesmerized by its call. Nothing could break their will. They were kids with endless engines, blasting forward without pause. They prowled the earth as true monsters. Robbery's gut clenched as a cold suspicion took root. His opponent might be one of those people. They exchanged names with deadly calm. Then the real fight erupted. Karuni's voice cracked as she revealed the old man from before was the Night Order's instructor. Then, in a heartbeat, everything flipped. Robbery shot his hands skyward. If their only aim was to pry him away from the bishop, he could just lean back and wait them out. The knight's jaw clenched. Weren't those two supposed to be companions? The boy snapped that it was just business for money. No way he'd risk his life that much. His relentless grilling about how to pay for the order shouted one thing. He was obsessed with money. Survival demanded it, and robbery gorged itself on the dishonorable. In the end, he refused to die and swore he'd stop lying. Doubt slams into Karuni. Had he really not meant to run? A commanding shout tore through the air. "Hands up! Drop your weapons!" He pounced the instant an opening appeared and struck her. She refused to lower her guard. Every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. They tore through the forest together, branches snapping and heartbeats hammering. Then, out of nowhere, his foot betrayed him and he toppled to the ground. Another of his tricks sprang to life. He leapt forward and hurled a fistful of dirt into the girl's face. He lunged and impaled Karuni's leg too. Rubbery seizes the chance and blurts it out. Anyone who dared preach to him dropped dead right before his eyes. Blow after blow slammed into the night, but it stayed conscious, awake, watchful, unbroken. Shock slammed into the swordsman. The kick he'd unleashed to finish her off had him reeling. Right then he whipped out a tiny vial. Karuni's mind clicked. He'd figured out it was poisoned. Robbery had planned to unleash it from the very start, only to find it couldn't strike his allies. Now a single scratch from his sword would cut her life short. Poison dooms a knight. Let his focus drift from the sword, and it's his end. The boy still bears the sting of being branded a coward for using those tactics. He could see the same cold calculation forming in his opponent's eyes. Rather than insult him, the girl surged forward and revealed herself. He grinned fiercely. Finally a worthy opponent to relish. Shame crashed over her the moment those words ripped out of her mouth. Even his robbery reeked of confusion. They exploded into action again, their attacks crashing into one another in a thunderous clash. After whipping through the air in a wild spin, the swordsman seized a gap and his blade tore across her skin. That should have been the final curtain. He hovered within striking distance of Karuni's sword. She didn't cut him. She drove a brutal fist straight into his gut. They pummeled him to the brink of blackout, every hit snatching away another flicker of consciousness. He'd even snuffed out her sight with the cloak. Karuni's sweeping reach sent him crashing, and the girl had planted herself there from the first move, baiting the blade to slice her. She perched on the razor-thin edge of their reach, then erupted into blistering close-quarters fury. Rubbery balked at the fray, unwilling to stay in the battle. He hung back, keeping everyone at arm's length. That forced her to unleash her long-range move. She gambled everything on the next strike landing before her opponent could even react. Karuni mirrored Hem's technique and unleashed it straight at her opponent. She wrenched herself free from one of his arms. That blew open the gulf between the two swordsmen's effort and skill. Poison slithered into her veins, piling up like a dark tide inside her. The instant she froze, they thrust the vial of antidote forward. Robbery thrusts it toward her. He traded a favor for their help. With death closing in, the swordswoman seals a desperate pact and yanks a strip of cloth over her wounds, wrapping it tight to staunch the bleeding. He snorted with laughter. She never even suspected anyone could trick her. He burned with the question, what would she have done if she'd kept the cure from him? Karuni snaps. I would have helped you no matter what. It was the kind of night she'd been craving, even if it was inappropriate to say. The words leapt from his mouth. A fierce grin split her face. She'd relished every clash of the battle. Again, she compelled Robbery to label her a total weirdo. It barely stung. She was the first opponent to recognize him. Back when she was a student, Beryl couldn't stop blurting the same words, like a broken record. She lives for the gleam of swords. She felt it in her bones. Every disciple had converged here with a purpose, to train until he could wield one. They had to taste the joy of doing it. A Beryl looms in the present. Were they moments away from being dragged into the face shuffle again? As the bishop bolted, he saw his opponent wielding a different sword, thin veins of magic snaking along its blade. His appearance screamed exhaustion, his body racked with pain. Many things about him altered, and yet, Beryl radiated an aura of pure, bone-deep terror. They tensed, muscles coiling as they readied to clash. The protagonist snapped, demanding to know why he was shadowing someone like that. Armed with a dazzling array of skills, he could have become anything. 15 years earlier, the story hurls us into the frost-bitten northeast of Svenjardvania. Back then, Shuffle lay grievously wounded, every breath a hard-fought victory. Cold shredded through him, and the brutal truth hit. He was going to die. When it struck, everyone shrugged. Nobody guessed it would explode into a nightmare. Right then, a girl barreled in. She screamed for her father to save him. The two caught wind that a boy had been attacked by monsters and was injured. Shuffle apologized for bothering them. The girl burst with excitement. He looked every bit a swordsman and even invited him to stay there and train with the guards. When the chance to show his skills arrived, the swordsman dismissed it with a bored flick of his wrist. Thrill surged through her as she showered him with ecstatic hugs and praise. He unleashed a flood of compliments and rapid-fire questions. Lafa Arentel flashed a grin, flung open her family's door, and pulled him inside. Days blurred into a relentless, unending loop. Luffy summoned Shuffle to either train with him or to talk about training. Even her father couldn't miss how she lit up and practically melted every time she looked at that boy. She was downright unhinged, darting around him like a maddening fly. Fragility lived in her bones, and the guard's flashing swords stole her breath. Her father offered to scold her for bothering him. Shuffle shrugged and brushed it off. She saw no need for a reprimand. During another training session, she reached out, swept the sweat from his brow, and asked to rest. The instant blood hit her eyes, her face drained of color. It struck her like a punch to the chest, leaving her shaken to the core. Laffy burst out apologizing, panic in his voice. I pushed you so hard you ended up with a nosebleed. He tore open a piece of his past, confessing he forged himself into a knight just to survive. He bled others dry and cut them down, but every victory tasted like ash. Beneath his calm, a fierce, lifelong hatred for swords burned in him. Lately, a fondness for them had sparked inside him. From that moment, he swore he'd stop throwing himself into danger and implored her to stop crying whenever she watched him struggle. A few years flashed by. Shuffle slammed his hand on the helm, planted himself in the captain's chair, and claimed command. That day, monsters poured out of the shadows, and he annihilated them in a heartbeat. The problem? A man lay gravely wounded. Some lunged for their phones to call people from the church, but it was already too late. Right then, LaFay barreled in and clutched the injured man's hand like it was a lifeline. He dropped to his knees, calling on Sven to guide him. The moment roared. This was the first time. Every jaw dropped as a miracle unfolded before their eyes. Wounds sealed in an instant as his body yanked back the limbs the battle had stolen. Her father pressed a small cup of alcohol into the swordsman's hands. A full day had burned away since Laffy collapsed into unconsciousness after unleashing the miracle. They'd never heard of anyone who could pull someone back from the brink and heal fatal wounds like that. She snapped awake as everyone barreled toward her bed. He discovered her, confusion clouding her eyes. Before long, a band of churchmen marched up the path to pay a visit. Ravenous curiosity surged through them toward the person who had just awakened. The power to conjure miracles out of thin air. The girl shot down their invitation. They told her the church dictates who may be saved. If that's true, they'd lock salvation away for only a chosen few. Luffy leapt in without hesitation to help anyone who wanted it. I'd choose the life of a wandering healer, roam the globe, stitch wounds, and chase a new sunrise in every town. That suggestion hit Shuffle, and he blurted he'd go with her. She staggered, stunned, and he, voice tight with nerves, warned it would be far too dangerous for the girl to go alone. Then the bombshell dropped. They decided to tie the knot. Shock ripped through the servants when the noble's daughter announced she was marrying a commoner. Just knight Shuffle and bind him to the family as a son-in-law, and the father would drop every objection. A cold certainty slammed into him. The moment his daughter chose, the world could flip and he'd have no idea how everything would change. He chose instead to bestow his blessing and stand shoulder to shoulder with them. The swordsman nodded as one, blades humming with grim agreement. Seasons spun away until, at last, Shuffle was formally dubbed a knight. A band of men melted into the shadows and slipped into the house. The swordsmen surged forward and stopped them cold. They rip off their masks and demand to know who they really are. That ignited a ferocious battle, and the announcement thundered. The invaders' echoes ripped through the mansion. The captain's cry, "Infiltrators in the house!" sent the other soldiers surging in to help. He readied himself to take them down from now on while the others scrambled to call for reinforcements. A sword slammed into his back without warning. Betrayal struck. His own men ambushed him. The invaders staggered, dumbfounded. None of this had been agreed upon. The truth hit like a thunderclap. Night after night had turned on the family, selling them out for cash and for the daughter. Hearing them talk about his fiancée, Shuffle sprang to his feet, rage boiling in his veins, and launched himself at them. He snuffed out their lives. One of the men barked that the church would never forsake her. Later, they also found Laffy's father, lifeless and alone in his room. The swordsman charged after Laffy. She was a live wire who leapt before thinking, somehow it should all be fine. She ached to believe that. He burst into her room and froze. She lay collapsed on the floor, a crimson lake pooling beneath her. The sight hurled him forward, a raw scream tearing free as he begged her to open her eyes. She shoved her own worries aside. Leif's voice broke as she blurted the news of her fiancé's injuries. Dread clawed deeper at Shuffle. He pleaded, voice raw and trembling, begging her not to worry about him. She must lock onto herself, unleash her miracle, and heal. But the girl wrenched her power free. It tore into his body instead. Panic ripped through him, clawing at his chest and stealing his breath. He begged her to stop. She burned with a fierce need to heal the wound tearing through his body. Relief slammed into her. Her beloved would live on. Her whole life, Laffy burned with one urgent question. Could she finally do something that truly mattered? That's why she forbade him from making that face. Steel settled in her veins. This was her duty. You mean even with Shuffle begging? She poured her heart into one final confession of love. Right then, the invaders crashed in, just as the rumors had warned. Before they could so much as move, the swordsmen surged forward, blades flashing as they closed in on them. Moments later, the noble house crumbled into ruin. Murder stalked the church knights, erupting again and again. Dozens fell in a relentless streak. A long while crawled by before the bishop finally came face to face with the hunter. His breath caught. The young man burned with enormous magical power, and he'd heard of rare souls who carried that force yet couldn't unleash it. The instant Shuffle hauled himself upright, Levios choked out that he had no hope of defeating him. He hunted him down, hell-bent on delivering his proposal. He dropped a bombshell. He could bring the dead back to life. The suggestion set the swordsman's fury ablaze. He snapped, "Shut up, or I'll kill you!" Once, Luffy swore his beloved could become a sword saint. Legends whisper that any swordsman who masters the secret art will be crowned with that legendary title. Could the sword saint truly be one of the mightiest forces to ever stride across the ages? Many of his disciples exploded into the spotlight, rising to become some of the era's most influential figures. Whispers said he passed down secret arts, and the disciple erupted into unmatched strength. Then he'd also seized the legendary title of Sword Saint. The secret arts vanished into silence, and the inheritance chain was brutally severed. So the next sword saint, the true heir? Whoever claimed the arts the right way. Or someone who forged their own signature techniques. Or then someone who could soar to even greater heights. Shuffle's breath hitched as Beryl loomed before him. Who could that person be? They trade blow after blow, attacks colliding in a non-stop storm. They collapsed in a relentless cascade. Meanwhile, Miwi shot upright in the carriage. Disorientation slammed into her. She had absolutely no idea where she was. They caught sight of the sword duel erupting outside, panic slamming into them. His mere movement shattered the blade of Shuffle's sword. He reached out and tapped a sliver of Laffy's power once more. Fortifying his body was pointless. He funneled every scrap of power into his blade. He snapped his weapon into position. It hurtled straight at the protagonist. He lunged forward, only to have his move brutally blocked. His opponent's defenses loomed like a fortress, nearly impenetrable. It was just enough, by a heartbeat, to spare them from injury. The joy of exchanging blades was a white-hot rush that seared through his veins. A fierce, familiar surge he'd once known. You're staring down the barrel? He could still summon the electric rush that had shot through him when he stood beside his beloved. He pounced on the chance, threw out his name to the protagonist, and the protagonist shot his own name right back. At last their blades slammed together, detonating a blinding flash of light. From that moment on, the cuts struck them both. Claws raked across flesh, carving jagged scratches and bleeding wounds. Sharp cuts slammed into chilling predictions. Their eyes snapped to the next attacks, razor-focused and ready. Until finally everything snapped into place. Shuffle crumpled first, taken down by a single razor-precise cut. Straining to focus, he forced himself upright. It was only a light wound. He steeled himself, determined to pour every ounce of strength into getting back to his feet. Out of nowhere, he skidded to a halt. A pair of shoes sat before him, his fiancée's. Her gentle gaze pinned him, and guilt surged when he finally understood what she felt. After the incident, he'd slaughtered several people and couldn't summon the courage to show his face to her. Before he met her, defeat stalked him. He stumbled, crashed, and failed again and again. Every step along his sword's path turned to waste. Beryl exploded with praise, awestruck by how incredible he was. He ached to see more of his skills unleashed. He barreled back to the carriage, heart pounding, desperate to make sure Maui was safe. He still had to sprint after the bishop. He had to staunch the flow of blood. Back at the bar, as they slammed drinks, Shuffle jabbed at Beryl and declared he looked exactly like the field's master swordsman. They snapped, "You here to do an extra over there?" Then warned that this man was a master fencer. He came from distant lands and rose to the rank of instructor in the Order of Knights. He has to be a powerhouse. He snapped back that at that exact moment he seemed amazing. Whispers tore through the streets. The so-called master boasted non-stop. He holed up like a recluse, cutting a ridiculous, over-the-top figure. Shuffle's gut screamed that the instructor was Beryl, but Beryl himself flat-out denied it. Those titles were pure nonsense, staggering and slurring like a drunk at last call. Still, the sting cut deep, a cruel, heartbreaking shame, because he couldn't save a single soul. When memories erupted into dreams, the protagonist snapped awake after the battle, heart hammering and senses razor-sharp. Alotio stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Inside the Order of Knights hospital room, every second thrummed with tension. Instantly, nerves seized her and she burst into a frantic stutter. She brushed the sweat from his sleeping brow, and Beryl, puzzled, still managed a thank you. When he heard he'd been unconscious for 2 whole days, shock crashed over him like a tidal wave. He snapped, "How's Miwi? Is she all right?" Seething with agitation, pain burned through him. The captain barked, "She's fine. She'd just slipped out to lay a heartfelt tribute for her sister." She watched him crumple to the ground after his fight with Shuffle. Panic slammed into Meiwi. In that instant, the knights slammed into place, each one slotting into its ordained order, and their eyes slammed onto the instructor, collapsed on the ground. They snatched the bishop, hauled him in, and ripped into him with fierce questioning. This is the grim tale of every corpse discovered inside the church. Every piece of evidence screamed his name. He was the prime suspect in these crimes. They turned to him and asked him to cooperate. Levios blurted that a shadowy swordsman sprang from nowhere, forcing him to bolt for his life. His subordinates hurled themselves forward to shield him, meeting the swordsman blade to blade. He implored them to help him capture the wrongdoer and pleaded for permission to speak with Evroy. For these guys, backed into a corner, this would force them to pivot hard onto a whole new course. It hit them, the irrefutable proof of Twilight. Flames would devour every last piece of proof of the miracle of reincarnation. Alocia cut in and announced a warrant had been issued for his arrest. She unfurled a scroll she'd pulled from the church's basement, every record laid bare. The bishop staggered back, dumbstruck. He couldn't fathom how this could be possible. It was Meiwi herself. She plunged into the church's confusion and snatched it away. He couldn't decipher a single word, yet the paper screamed importance. The order's commander erupted in praise. They finally had the opening to haul Levios into custody. The girl blurted that a towering knight had seized her, and she feared they'd discover her theft. The bishop himself snapped at them to search her, see if she carried anything. Shuffle snapped, swearing she hadn't stolen a thing. Rage boiled in Livius's veins when he discovered the swordsman had been betraying him far longer than he'd ever suspected. Beryl felt it in his chest. Those two had pulled everything into place. Fissel and Karuni came through unscathed, arriving safely and diving straight into medical treatment. A heavy, defeated sigh tore from the protagonist. Everything had spiraled into this disaster because of him. The commander sprang to his feet. A hand shot up and landed a gentle slap across his face. Right then she burst into an apology. No malice, just raw, genuine concern. Her master's apologies rang hollow now. He showed up just in time. Without him, Moy would have walked into that church alone, and it could have turned into a far worse tragedy. His presence alone snatched that life back from the brink. Even with his instructor's towering strength, trying to take on everything alone shattered him. Spotting his frustrated, crying disciple, Beryl choked out an apology for worrying her. Later, he entered the cemetery. There he ran smack into Halika's little sister. A truth burned on the protagonist's tongue. They wanted Aluja to hear it first, how he wound up hurting the late Helika. The knight's eyes snapped to the same mark on her body, too. They traced it to corpse control magic, and relief crashed over them like a breaking wave. Beryl swore to Meiwi they'd hunt down her sister. When the moment came, the burden fell to him. He had to lay every secret bare for her. The instant she spotted the protagonist closing in, shock slammed into her. Worry knotted in her throat as she stared at his wounds. But Beryl barked a laugh and swore he was well enough. They faced Halika's grave. They'd already gathered once to lay them to rest. The scene slammed into the swordsman and lit a white-hot frustration inside him, begging forgiveness for everything that happened. She slammed the door on every apology, wouldn't hear a single one now. Until then, people had smothered Meiwi with nonstop concern, and the suffocating attention made her squirm. Relief exploded through them. She was fine, so they no longer had to worry. In the end, she pulled off one final reunion with her sister. She shoved aside every word meant to comfort her. Satisfaction surged through her. She'd finally said goodbye to Helika. Her maturity shattered Beryl's composure. He crumpled and burst into tears, utterly overwhelmed. It drove agony into his bones, leaving his body aching. Images of the swordsman he'd fought slammed through his mind. It hit him. Shuffle was probably the most powerful man he'd ever faced. In that instant, we all turned to me and demanded answers. Could she ever topple him if she plunged into training right now? The protagonist didn't hesitate for a heartbeat. He shot back an immediate, "Yes!" That confirmation ignited her. She demanded he teach her to wield a sword. They snatched up the request and greenlit it on the spot. From that instant, the two charged forward, shoulder to shoulder. The master swordsman strode out to drink again. This time, he'd stand alone. The crowd swelled, people taking seats all around him. Beryl's mind kept snapping back to his old opponent. A new day exploded into being. Lucy's breath caught when news slammed into her. The protagonist had taken a new disciple. Not a shred of surprise. She'd been bracing for this from the start. Mui never stopped badgering Lucy with the same burning question. Do swordsmen use magic? Beryl's curiosity flared. He had to uncover the source of this sudden interest. She snapped under a barrage of questions, and the magical commander roared with laughter. That heart-melting moment hit her. She turned to Beryl and asked, "Would you like to be the girl's guardian?" Moy stood poised to claim her place at the Magic Academy, but a guardian was required. After a spark of interest in the path of the sword ignited within him, and watching veterans clash with blades right before my eyes, Lucy had even suggested earlier that she belonged at the protagonist's side. She could soak up magic at school and spar fiercely with her new fencing tutor. Seeing her tighten with apprehension, the commander stepped forward, locked eyes with her, and vowed she could trust him. Fear gnawed at Mui. Her greatest nightmare was waking up one day to a world that hated her. Back in the present, Lucy yanked Beryl close, eyes blazing, and begged him to take care of the orphan. He accepted the request instantly. His heart hammered. He had to hear the girl's opinion first and know if she approved of the idea. The question slammed into her, panic tightening her throat. She nodded, sealing her agreement too. Beryl squirmed at the thought of being cooped up in such cramped quarters right now. Mui offered to sleep on the floor, and her new guardian shut that down instantly with a sharp, uncompromising no. Then the magical commander's eyes snapped open as a forgotten memory slammed back into him. He slammed the keys to a brand new house into the swordsman's hands. At the location, Moy and Harvey, Lucy's housemaid, had converged. The maid sprang forward, volunteering to guide them. They crossed the threshold into the place that would be their new home. Erected as the commander's book vault, the house now stands abandoned, its shelves choked with dust. After Beryl's deeds, this reward became the lifeline they desperately needed. Even with the duo camped inside, the place was buried under a mountain of books. Mayui seethed at her inability to read, and Beryl piped up that he could teach her later. Pain clawed at his body, even though he was supposedly fully healed. She spotted him faltering under the stack, leapt forward to shoulder the books herself. Then, from outside, urgent voices rang out, calling for the protagonist. There they were, the knights. Someone showed up to visit him. When the news he'd moved slammed into her ears. With everyone's old wounds finally healed, they surged forward, desperate to help. The instant Eludia and Lysandra locked eyes, they snapped into fighting stances. Both burned with the urge to help. They erupted into another shouting match, and Mayui flinched as dread tightened her throat. The instant they noticed it, Selena blurted out an apology and introduced herself to her as a fellow disciple. The knight's commander planted himself in front of the girl, a living shield to hold her back. Then, out of nowhere, Beryl crashed to his knees before his disciple. He shot her a grateful, almost breathless thanks. She'd picked up the tab for the daily this time. The whole gang plunged into cleaning the house, scrubbing and hauling until every corner gleamed, until dusk swallowed the sky. They descended on a massive feast. Bathed in warmth and light, the scene yanked Magui back into the hollow loneliness of her life. Appreciation surged through them, making the moment burn even brighter. He dropped the bomb. The girl would be attending the magic school. They dubbed the faculty Magic Blade. Thistle strode forward and proclaimed she would take charge as the instructor of this faculty. In the magic division, she reigned as a renowned mage, forged by her time as Beryl's apprentice. If she stepped into the teacher's role, she'd be a steady anchor, a comforting beacon everyone instinctively follows. Even the protagonist staggered back upon learning Vistal was the fencing instructor. He dropped a bombshell that sent the whole group reeling, utterly baffled. The Vart Lane Magic School teemed with people, its halls a churning river of motion. Students and teachers, too. There, the principal faced the commander of the magic division and, voice edged with steel, asked him to protect the building for now. Maybe she leaned in, eyes locked on the magic blade's power, waiting for a shocking spectacle to erupt. The principal gave a firm nod and leaned in, eyes locked on Lucy as he demanded, "What will you do now?" That's when his eyes snagged on a single new name, Beryl Gardnant. On the day they arrived for the first day of class, the protagonist's heart hammered harder than anyone else's at the academy. "May we witness this?" Reluctantly, she handed him the reins. Thistle burst into view, a man suddenly standing at her side. He bore the title of vice principal at Academy Faustus. He strode forward and greeted the two with a sharp, confident nod. Principal Lucy's news hit him, and a grin flared across his face as the new girl joined the other students. Before that, the vice principal summoned Beryl. The old man summoned a blazing beacon of light magic to guide the new student to her class. She chose her path and charged ahead, jaw dropping at how shockingly kind he was. The light burst with Thistle's signature. Not just a glow, it was a marking spell. Faustus was once Lucy's disciple, and he stormed through the magic division as its undisputed ace. Everyone knew he was the walking surprise, unpredictable at every turn. That night, after this protagonist slipped out, the knights clustered and murmured that their swordsman had been haunted by a quiet sadness lately. Something must have gone down. Every time their master slammed himself with blame, the disciples felt it like a punch. They couldn't miss it. Dread coiled in their chests. The girls scrambled to find any way to help him. Meanwhile, the vice principal snatched a barrel bristling with thistle to hash out how to secure help in the classes. Lucy blasted the mage swordswoman as utterly incompetent to teach anyone. In the dojo, a memory crashed into the protagonist. They remembered. It was true. Words always tangled on her tongue. Right when Thistle was about to step into the new instructor role, a massive problem exploded onto the scene. They begged the protagonist to jump in and shepherd the students alongside her. He blurted yes on the spot, worry coiling like a snake in his gut. Sidelining the fencing dispute, someone else would swoop in and take charge of the magic. Although Faustus taught his students with fierce, undeniable skill, he'd become notorious for openly despising the magic blade. He roared that sorcerers must wield only their mastery of sorcery and never touch another weapon. Blessed with fearsome power, taking up a second weapon branded you dishonorable. The simmering feud between Thistle and Faustus could erupt at any moment and drag the academy into chaos. These wizards weren't about to let defeat steal the night. Still, Lucy hung back, fiercely hands off, and never one to meddle. She asked to be alerted the instant anything happened. Her words hammered in Beryl's mind, but the instant she faced the vice director, something inside her snapped. Thistle orchestrated the classes, sending students to two separate instructors, one for sword, the other for magic. The mage kicked the first class off with ruthless drills to master movement with their swords. Kick things off by making everyone drill the movement 1,000 times. In that heartbeat, Faustus and the protagonists braced themselves. This woman would be trouble. When they surged into the classrooms, the swordsman strode forward and declared himself the temporary instructor. He'd taught the supervisor before. This time, he dove in headfirst to work with the students there. They kicked off introductions, and Beryl called on the first student in line. The girl stepped into the light and proclaimed, Fledora Enoch, who seethed with silent torment. She wouldn't dare entrust the teachings to anyone who couldn't wield magic. Everyone saw Fledora's magic well barely flicker beside the roaring reservoirs of the others, even burning to join the magic division. At this rate, his chances were slipping away, and the climb would be brutally difficult. They had to cram every skill into her, but the moment she clashed with the others, all that training would turn into a dangerous liability. That's why she was thrust into the faculty of the magic blade, though she'd never even held a sword. A single misstep now would strip her of every shred of honor. Next, Mui strode into the spotlight and declared who she was. She plastered on a blank stare and pretended she'd never met her instructor. This time, the whole class plunged headfirst into their very first fencing training. The students surged outside, and FISL unleashed a fierce demonstration. From a staggering distance, she cleaved her target clean in two. It blindsided the students. She unleashed restoration magic. A jolt of shock seized the protagonist. The training dummy soaked up every strike in practice, and that mastery kept it battle-ready for the long haul. Fledora heaved at the sword, muscles screaming, but its crushing weight barely budged under her hands. Noticing her struggle, Faust darted forward to steady her and check she hadn't hurt herself. Beryl erupted into praise for the student whose cut was razor clean. Whispers erupted as a few students splintered into side conversations, and Faustus' sermon's Fledora trembled with terror. A fierce drive burns inside her. Even if it's only for her parents, she refuses to let them down. She heaved at the sword, muscles burning, when the protagonist suddenly surged in, and together they hoisted the blade aloft. He confessed he'd once warped his own blade mid-training. He roared for her to keep going. I barked crisp adjustments so she could unleash raw force and lock into a stronger, battle-ready stance. After relentless practice, the student finally sliced through the training dummy. The others' jaws dropped, eyes wide with awe. They bolted to the instructor, begging to be taught too. Beryl bellowed praise, celebrating the razor-clean cut Fledora had just landed. Her voice cracked as she choked out that she wanted to become a sorceress and join the magic division. Her power lagged well below average, so they urged her to go there to make up for it. A cold doubt sliced through her. Could a single blade truly shatter sorcery? Even the protagonist burned to know the answer. Then a voice snapped, urging the students to all try to turn and face their instructor. Whenever a student found their mark, they claimed a point, just like scoring in a game. The vice director barreled into the fray, strapping armor onto the students to shield them from harm, and a crackling, shimmering magical barrier erupted around. Curiosity burned in him when Beryl squared off against the wizards with only her sword. She was out to show off. They staged a class that pitted students against real magic, flinging them into raw, live combat to forge true battle experience. Inexperienced wizards or not, 5 of them swarmed him, and Faustus's assumptions shattered. The battle erupted, blades screamed and war roared to life. The students launched themselves forward in a single thunderous charge. Fledora couldn't land a single hit. Terror slammed into her the second barrel charged. She bolted, her scream ripping through the air as she ran for help. Desperation clawed at them. Using magic in their current state would drain every last drop of their magical power. The vice director's eyes widened. Was the instructor out to force them to burn through every scrap of magic? Fissel shot back that he'd already pulled the same move on the division commander before. The magic erupted, a jaw-dropping blast of raw power. A green child could shatter a seasoned warrior's defenses, and that was why nations poured every resource into a breakneck race to dominate research in that field. The power crumbled beneath the sword's edge. Faustus stared, disbelief roaring through his veins. Suddenly, a blazing ribbon of magic lashed out and wrenched the barrel away from Fledora. The moment cracked, she seized it and darted away to freedom. Moy bent her power to shove him onto her magic. One misstep and it would count as an attack. She lunged to trap him. The other student opened her mouth to thank Mui, but Mui snapped, "Cast your spell now!" Students from other classes thundered down the halls to witness the chaotic battle. Whispers exploded through the corridors. Beryl was the temporary instructor, and he taught without a hint of magic. The protagonists surged forward and sent Fledora crashing to the ground. He flashed a grin and proclaimed fencing wasn't so bad. The other students bolted, feet pounding as they fled. She burst into laughter, reveling in the rush of pure fun. Right smack in the middle of it all. Beryl jabbed a finger at Fizzle and demanded, "What edge does the magic blade have over every other spell?" She declared it lets you fight from long range or up close with razor-sharp control, and if the magic ever dies, the sword still stands between you and danger. The protagonists could tell every person in that class had soaked up a ton of knowledge and walked out, beaming with satisfaction. When the mage closed his eyes and dove headfirst into his thoughts, the very first lesson her master hammered into her at the dojo was a version of that. It all boiled down to the raw thrill of wielding a sword. The students erupted with energy, beaming as they dove headfirst into the practical lesson. The vice principal strode up to the protagonist, intent burning in their gaze. He challenged him. "Care to battle me?" Back then, Lucy was Faust's tutor, hammering him into shape with training just like this. She locked eyes with him and asked, "Have you ever been defeated by a skilled swordsman?" The boy swore he hadn't, and his master snapped that she'd once been that very thing herself. Only a ghost of memory clung to that person. It was a long time ago. Curiosity clawed at her disciple. Could this be a sword saint from ancient times? Lucy beamed, eyes sparkling, and swore the duel had been a total blast. She guaranteed it. Back in the present, the vice principal slammed a gauntlet down and dared the protagonist. Word of it detonated through every hallway and classroom. Nothing like this had ever happened before. He once reigned as the Magic Division's ace. Only the commander stood above him in power. Fledora seized the chance and slid in beside Miwi. They huddled together, hearts racing. Nobody could guess who would win. It was undeniable. The old man's strength slammed into the room. Old sources whisper that Faust fights with blade and spell in the same deadly motion. He wanted to say that anyone, even the mana-starved, could turn the tide by wielding a sword. The vice principal relented, shoved the weapon into his student's hands, and dared him to test the theory. The half-baked spell misfired and snuffed out his life. The thought of taking up a sword screamed pure lunacy. From that moment, he slammed the lid on experimentation, forbidding every student from testing any new technique. He vowed to forge them into true mages, never once drawing a sword. Faustus burned to witness Beryl's true potential, and to expose whether Fissel was a manufactured genius or simply blinded by her master's warped perspective. He closed in and demanded she unsheath her true blade. A wooden sword wouldn't cut it. He wanted his opponent to storm in with murderous intent. The protagonist snapped, "I'm in!" The mage ignited his magic. The ground buckled and warped beneath his feet. He unleashed a stone golem, exactly like the one Lucy used to whip up. Telekinesis let you seize and hurl objects with your mind alone. Every sorcerer had to master it. Faustus burned bright in this field, an undeniable prodigy. His precision matched his teacher's, razor-sharp and unerring, every motion a flawless echo. His grip on his magic surged, propelling the protagonist out of the path of the attacks. The vice principal froze, bafflement ripping through his composure. A single question gnawed at him. Why hadn't he tried to cut them? Beryl snapped that a while back she lunged at a flamethrower, and it didn't even flinch. Understanding struck Faustus, and he remarked on the sword he'd just claimed. The weapon hewn from a griffin pulsed with fierce living magic. It could tear magic right out of spells. Anything snatched by telekinesis snapped free from control. Faustus seized the moment and seared this vital lesson into the students' minds. Seizing the opening, the protagonist lunges and puts his weapon to the test. Storm over to the old man and roar your thanks for his guidance. At last, the duel roared back to life. As the attacks crashed in, the sword ripped the magic in two, cleaving the spell into twin shards. The battle erupted, every clash cracking the sky with fire and steel. Thistle's breath caught as the vice principal channeled the commander's magic. She swallowed her pride and conceded Lucy had been right. Beryl's sword tore through the magic and unleashed a thunderous explosion. The scabbard rocketed at the old man and smacked him square in the face. Faust unleashed his sorcery, puppeteering Beryl's clothes like a living marionette. Surprise cracked through him as the bound swordsman closed in anyway. He only had to hold him fast. His hand met empty air, his sword had vanished. His head snapped up as he caught it streaking just above him. It tumbled, slamming down right between them. He slammed a hand over his foe's eyes, buying the split second to launch his sword. Then the moment hit. He had his shot to try to punch the vice principal square in the face. He slammed to a stop the moment the battle finally ended. Startled, Beryl froze when he saw Faustus's staff snapped in two. Shock pinned him, and Faustus shrugged. It's fine, cheap staff, easily replaced. The duel fell silent, and the old man's eyes shone as he conceded it had been magnificent. Even Fledora shimmered with excitement. Then she caught sight of someone watching her and blurted an embarrassed apology. Meanwhile, the swordsman sat, replaying the battle, blow by savage blow. A few days raced past in a blur. Sword classes thundered on while Thistle drove her students to keep their magical powers burning. She beckoned the instructor over to assess everyone's posture. Even the vice principal was stuck dead center, and Beryl pleaded with him not to push himself so hard. Determination lit a fire in his eyes as the old man stepped forward and thanked her again for teaching the class. Thistle finally wrapped up the lessons and urged them to keep practicing later. From that day on, Fledora and Maui forged an inseparable bond and trained shoulder to shoulder, and the protagonist lit up watching the youngsters burst with boundless energy. Soon, even the doubters were on their feet, cheering the mage's jaw-dropping improvement as a teacher. Their goal was to forge the students into masters of magic and swordplay, and they were excelling. Right then, Faustus whirled to the protagonist and asked for a sliver of his time. He pulled him towards the staircase, excitement crackling. He had something to show. My jaw hit the floor when I realized an entire place like this had been hidden inside a bathroom. The trio hurtled down the Magic Academy's stairs and burst into the underground research laboratory. This place pulsed with all manner of magical research. Beyond its practical uses, it became a vault that sealed away lethal magical beasts and cursed relics. That laboratory must never see the light of day. It concealed the world's deepest, deadliest secrets. A silence spell slammed over everyone there, sealing them in a protective hush. Beryl's stomach twisted. Had she made a mistake coming here? Thistle warned the vice principal planned to keep the place secret. He enforced the rules with iron will, so when someone suddenly revealed a third party like that, the whole room went silent. The three burst into a cavernous room that stood as a crucible for training. Curiosity ignited in the protagonist, and Faust's eyes were slammed onto an object sitting dead center in the room. Right at the center loomed Lono Ambrosia. Whatever it had been, it meant nothing now. All attention snapped to what would happen the moment they closed in. The creature ripped monsters from the shadows and tore into them with ruthless, limitless ferocity. Sealed shut for eternity, it became a merciless crucible, where mages were forged through relentless training. What blew me away? It adapted instantly, scaling itself to the exact threat level of whoever it faced. Faust thrust a chance into the protagonist's hands. Confront it and watch what erupts. Both mages burned with desperate eagerness and bore down on him until he crumbled and yielded. Beryl snapped her sword free, and a figure ripped itself from the shadows. A human silhouette loomed. The sketch snapped into the shape of a man. drawn alive and wielding a blazing sword. The shadow erupted into a human swordsman. The moment it happened for the first time, they roared at the protagonist. "Never let your guard down." The air went electric, especially when the shadow snapped into a combat stance. The vice principal barked a warning, snapping the nearby mages to attention. Magic ripped the veil away and revealed exactly what was happening. "Everyone keep your guard up, stay sharp. Bolt shut and seal every passage to the underground level. Lock them tight to keep everyone safe." One of the school's mages strode out of the classes and bolted toward the laboratory. Even Fizzle ripped her sword free from its sheath. The shadow stubbornly refused to budge, not even a twitch. It sat there, poised like a predator, waiting for them. The vice principal stormed over and spoke to Beryl in a voice that cut through the room. A piercing warning blared that the apparition was unidentified. "Pull back, don't fight." He clamped his mouth shut and never breathed a single word about the bane. He didn't hear a word. Every fiber of him was riveted on the shadow he faced. In those stretched seconds, the protagonist's mind hurled one brutal death scene after another at him. His opponent slammed every opening shut. The mages shouted to the vice principal, declaring they were ready to defend the room. Chains snaked through the darkness and seized the shadow as the containment team braced for action, gripping its sword. The creature cleaved through the magic like a blade through silk. Are all the containment wards still holding? Even the water one! This was flawless fencing. Razor-sharp thrusts and lightning-fast parries, not a single wasted motion. It tore through the air at a speed no human could touch. The shadow zeroed in, claiming it all as its next prey. Faust vows to stop it, even if he has to die for it. Hold on, did the protagonist strike first? The silhouette whipped aside, dodging with effortless precision. The creature's sword whipped past his jaw, its edge barely kissing his skin. A lightning-fast cross-step snapped into place, turning the attack aside. "Can we conquer it if we dig in?" He sliced the creature's foot clean off. That sent it reeling backward. It plunged straight into the containment. A cube slammed shut, entombing it once more. The shadows slammed into the barrier. Trapped. They couldn't break out or spawn any new darkness inside. At the vice principal's signal, everything snapped into motion. Vistul ripped open the air and hurled a searing blast of magic. The attack slammed into the magical barrier, detonating in a blinding blast of light that snuffed out everything. A lone, tiny object lingered. Barrier after barrier slammed shut around him, burying him deeper and deeper. The main body lay caged, and even Lano Ambrosia's ceiling lay trapped too. Beryl still clutched her sword. He snapped, demanding to know what had happened. Faust's mystery is ripped wide open. The gem was the true body. They entombed it inside a flawless barrier, squeezing out every crack so not even a shadow could be born. That swordsman could no longer show his face. Relief surged through the protagonist. Bloodied and staggering, he clung to life, injured but alive. They slammed the seal shut, locking the creature away until its fury cooled. And under no circumstances was anyone to make contact. Beryl erupted in praise as her disciple felled the shadows with a single crushing blow. A fierce curiosity gnawed at her. Was that swordsman truly strong? He agreed, his mind spinning the choice until cold clarity snapped into place. When asked about Lucy, her voice vanished. She couldn't name it. She'd never laid eyes on it. Nothing else moved. They had to make that record first. Her jaw dropped. Faust was personally leading an outsider down into the underground levels. The old man could no longer brand him an outsider. Meanwhile, Fizzle's focus snapped. His attention darted away. A silencing spell slammed into the protagonist, snatching their voice mid-sentence. She dove in on her first try and swore she'd nailed it. She lunged at her master, voice cracking as she thanked him for saving her just moments earlier. Back when she still lived at the dojo, she'd bolt to the disciple's side the instant he got hurt. Beryl rushed to her rescue. She always pushed herself to the limit. He was her teacher. A new case crashed into the church knight's hands, daring them to crack it. The knight shot a sharp word at her commander. He was moving far too fast. They leaned in, eyes alight, and shot. "What did you think of the joint festival with the Liberous Kingdom this time?" First, they had to lock down the sequence. Only the most reliable, most skilled would be chosen. True to form, the commander butchered every battle plan. He seized on one hard truth. The swordswoman at his side was from the Liberous Kingdom. Back then, Rose tore into fencing training at a hidden dojo deep in the kingdom's interior. Eludia burst into the dojo and ran straight into Beryl. She marched up and introduced herself to him. She slipped in alone, her parents swallowed by the relentless grind of merchant life. The swordsmen were stunned to find the village's quiet crushed them with a raw, aching loneliness. Even at a young age, she saw it clearly and vowed she'd be fine. They watched her grind relentlessly and knew she was the hardest working person in the room. Her father slumped through his shift, pale and clearly a little sick. It happened on an ordinary day, quiet, routine, and utterly unremarkable. He barked, ordering her to pack her things and leave. He revealed the fencing dojo in the village of Beeden and thrust her into sword training. He slammed the door on her involvement with the Merchants Association and pushed her out. Hesitation clawed at Alocia, but she swallowed and gave a shaky yes, agreeing to his request. Landred tore into this training dummy, each swing carving perfect razor-edged cuts. Beryl grabbed the new disciple's arm and coached him through each movement until it became instinct. He finally noticed her, taut as a wire, gasping. And was she clutching at memories of her father? Just as she raised the blade, the protagonist lunged in and stopped her. He spotted the blade had gone dull, honed its edge, and told them they'd train another time. Landred stepped forward, apology ripping from his lips. He'd been the one who dulled the blade. The swordsman smirked and declared the blade perfectly intact. He swallowed the truth and spat out a lie. She was different. Many children grab a sword for the first time and feel nerves ignite, hearts hammering, hands trembling. Beryl thrust the duty onto his disciple, guard Alocia until he returned. She hung back, refusing to close the gap. He ripped himself away from the others at the dojo. Until the fateful day dawned. Picture this. 2 schools training together. What chaos would erupt? The protagonist charged forward to greet Rodius, who'd appeared with his students at his side, and plead, voice cracking, for you to be diluted. Watch yourself. Avoid getting hurt. Then dive in and savor every wild second of the experience. They drilled the same warning into her again and again, and every word cut like a razor. This was deadly serious. She didn't despise the sword. Every swing ignited a fierce, hungry thrill. Landred stood among them. He surged forward, crushed his opponent from the other school, and stood victorious. Rodius felt a jolt. The dojo students were sharper, faster, and stronger than the last time he'd seen them. Right then, his gaze snapped to the new student who'd arrived 6 months earlier. Her footwork snapped, sharp and sure, and she instantly looked like someone with real promise. She blended into the crowd, utterly average. She drifted in with no fire in her eyes. She'd only joined because someone told her to. Rodius realized he'd blurted too much, and the protagonist felt that same guilty sting. Even the opponent Eludia squared off against. He sensed her caution like a coiled spring, each step deliberate, her gaze razor-sharp. She flowed through the form her instructors had drilled into her, every move razor-sharp. Doubt clawed at her. Why was she even doing this? Right then, distraction swallowed the room. She unleashed a devastating strike that sent her opponent reeling. Young Cedric crumpled to the floor, his vision snapping shut as he blacked out. Beryl rocketed over, heart hammering, desperate to check his condition. Dread slammed into her the moment she realized her mistake. Alocia bolted, despair clawing at her throat. The student reeled from a mild concussion as Rodius ripped into him for charging forward without thinking. He blurted an apology for his student, but the other master stayed serene, brushing it off. Accidents happen. Dread gnawed at him for the student who'd fled. Eludia bolted, racing until the horizon swallowed her. Confusion roared through him. He couldn't fathom why she'd done it. You actually want to turn back and apologize? The thought of being cast aside again gnawed at her, a cold shadow she couldn't shake. She steeled herself. She wouldn't be a burden, wouldn't annoy, wouldn't irritate a single soul. She crumpled into a shaking ball, sobbing, as the cold, sickening realization that she might have made a huge mistake slammed into her. Not long after, Beryl tracked her down. A letter from that girl's father had landed in his hands. He blurted a sharp apology, shame burning for how rude it was to send her. He implored him to train his daughter and set her on the path of the sword. Her family ran a tiny shop, and when whispers of bandits ambushing caravans reached them, they insisted Alocia learn to fight. So she caught wind of a dojo that welcomed anyone, no matter their age or gender. Fragile and fever-prone, Alocia was thrust into helping with the business before she even turned 6. She never complained or acted selfishly, and they clung to her until she was carrying them far longer than they ever should have. She burned too bright to be trapped as just an assistant. Her father wouldn't have it. He implored the protagonist, "Take care of the girl." Beryl snapped at him, voice raw with defiance. Her father never abandoned her. Instead, he pushed her out into the world. His love for her eclipsed everything. Eludia sobbed so hard her tears drenched and stained her instructor's clothes. He swept his hand across her face. He knew she'd been holding on with iron will the whole time. No force could pry them away. Her father and her master always stood at her side. Right then, Alucia swore she'd marry Beryl when she grew up, a promise hit like a thunderclap, completely unannounced and impossible to ignore. She bolted, cheeks flaming with embarrassment. After they'd settled the clash with the rival school, Rhodius stormed off, his students trailing in his wake. He couldn't deny it. The new disciple was unrecognizable compared to who they were before the tournament. Her admiration for her master blazed so fiercely that nothing else mattered. Landrid barreled in, breathless, yelling that her instructor had already been training since dawn. The next morning, surprise slammed into Beryl and left him reeling. The student sprang awake long before dawn. Eludia's words stumbled out. "It was by chance," she gasped. Then she begged, "Let me train with you." They trained together, driving each other onward. Her evolution erupted, racing into sharp, undeniable clarity. And whenever they pressed her for her thoughts, she blurted it out. The lessons were fun. A fierce fire burned in her chest. She swore she'd become just like her master. One day a chilling thought slammed into her. He could be a monster. Eludia's gaze snapped to Beryl, pinned in conversation with a man outside the dojo. This guy fired off a sharp question. Why did he stay away from the city when his strength could have ripped its walls down? As the disciple grew, each day honed him sharper than before. Her master's words thundered in her mind. It was about making the people you love see the world. And that drove her to drag Beryl out of the dojo. Newly knighted, she was summoned before the king, called up alongside him. A blazing notice slammed onto the board for the Knights of Liberian. The Friendship Festival was coming. Every year, the festival exploded into color and sound, roaring to celebrate the peace between Liberian and Svenjardvania. The location rotated every year, and this time the spotlight slammed down on Monrovia, the capital of Liberia. With the usual security locked down, they summoned the knights to take on another task. It revolved around Princess Sarakia. Her fiancé stood as Glenn, the first prince of Svenjardvania. He would plunge into the festival, while the two were whisked away on a pre-wedding tour, flanked by the Knights of Liberian as their escort. Glenn stunned everyone by throwing his hat into the ring and signing up for the Friendship Festival. Eludia's jaw clenched. She knew this mission would be dangerous. Barrel-eyed, guarding the royals as the perfect chance to etch his name into legend. Deep in thought, she was ripped back as a courier burst in with a message for the two commanders. It roared the story of the Sven Church's Order of Knights, barreling through the gates. Rose's heart thundered as she barreled back into the capital after so long. She hadn't set foot here in years. Prince Glenn stormed in alongside the rest of the knights. The next morning, Mui sprang awake, bursting with energy after a deep, perfect sleep. He tore into barrel training right outside the house. It blindsided everyone. Sweat poured from him, even though the practice moved so slow and calm it barely breathed. At the breakfast table, the protagonist suddenly blurted it out. He charged straight to meet the knights. Then the girl blurted, "I've been called out!" At the next festival, Fladora rallied everyone, insisting they all go together. The idea slammed into her and she froze, breath snagging in her throat. Moi ripped off so many people that several others were captured or cut down. Since then, doubt gnawed at her. Was it right to enjoy life like this? Beryl snapped, "Don't you dare forget that feeling." It kept her afloat for now. Back then, she had no choice. She knew her older sister would beam the moment she saw her surrounded by friends. Beryl marched to his job, the arena where he'd square off with Eludia in a duel. The other knights pressed in, eyes alight with hunger to see who would emerge victorious. If Karuni had to bet, she'd slam her hand down and name her instructor. The commander herself dropped the bombshell. She had a weakness. Alotia struck first, a streak of motion as she unleashed her skill at blinding speed. She surged forward so fast there was no time to think. Tactics didn't matter. That divine flash stripped her technique bare. He could win any straight-up fight, but Alucia knew his tricks too, so the whole clash hinged on how she performed. The duel erupted, and the sword-wielding woman shot across to the other side, a gambit forged to blind an opponent who could read tactics. Even the other knights struggled to keep them in sight. Their eyes darted and kept coming up empty. Beryl froze. Not a muscle stirred. The commander realized with a cold certainty he couldn't escape him. Only the faintest twitch betrayed him. That strike still couldn't finish him. Gasps exploded as she blinked out of sight, leaving everyone stunned. Then she sprang up behind her opponent. By whipping around and tearing off the other way, she pulled every stunt to vanish into her instructor's blind spot. Even as someone closed in on his back, Beryl whipped her head around, peering over her shoulder. She snapped her wooden sword up and parried his attack. A single strike sent it tumbling. At last, the clash crowned its victor. A jagged slash ripped through the protagonist's hood. He brushed that detail aside, hauled his disciple to her feet, and showered her with praise for how much she'd improved. Those words struck the commander like lightning, stirring a storm in his chest. John and Kiruni stared, hearts racing, as they replayed how the protagonist's cover was ripped away in the blind spot. Suddenly, a man smirked and declared he'd maneuvered the swordswoman exactly where he wanted her. He dropped into a semi-approach stance, turning himself into a living shield that guarded a wide arc in front of him. The moment Alosha vanished from sight, Beryl snapped into a coiled stillness. He knew the strike would come from behind and could only wait. He roared, praising the duel as brilliant. The instant he saw them, recognition slammed into him. Their uniforms bore the crest of the Order of the Holy Knights. They had arrived. The man who'd ripped the battle apart with his analysis cut through the chaos and closed in on Beryl to talk. Shock hit him. The man loomed so tall he even eclipsed Balder. Behold Gotoka Lazorn, commander of the Order of the Holy Knights. At the Friendship Festival, where knights always trained side by side, he'd beckoned them to spar. Gotoga jabbed a finger and barked at Rose. Is this really the guy? The title Vice Commander slammed into him, sending a cold sweat down his spine. He knew exactly who it named. The moment her eyes locked on him, the world snapped still. He snapped rigid like a statue, leaving Elutea staring, utterly baffled. For a heartbeat, Beryl's memory betrayed him. He'd nearly forgotten Rose served in the Order of the Holy Knights. The knight lunged forward, offering to wipe the sweat from his brow. He shot the offer down instantly. It was plain she clung a little too hard, and the commander bristled. 5 years after Rose stormed into the dojo, she'd already been deadly with a blade the moment she first stepped through the door. Her heart blazed as she poured herself into caring for the children and tending to her own master. She clung to the Sven church like oxygen, dropping to her knees and pouring out ceaseless prayers. In that sea of female students, she was the youngest apprentice of them all. Kiruni exploded with joy when she spotted another trainee from her dojo. While the other stayed composed, Alusha seethed with obvious jealousy. Rose kept smothering her with adorable antics, and the commander practically short-circuited from stress. Kotoga pulled the Holy Knights aside for a private parley. The vice commander barely snatched Beryl's coat and began stitching it on the run. Her gaze snapped to an older woman. He snapped, "Hold on, just a moment." He probed about the church's sister, and the captain revealed she too hailed from the Holy Knights. The protagonist swallowed his pride and apologized, each word raw with remorse. He slipped inside and almost convinced himself his imagination was playing tricks, giving him that strange impression. Out of nowhere, a shady stranger slid up to Beryl, leaned in, and spoke. The man beckoned him to fall in beside the Holy Knights and stride into the room. Hands steady, they sealed the door and drew the curtains tight, cloaking the space from sight. Caution ran cold through them, every move measured and razor-sharp. This suspicious man scowled and snapped, "Why did I even ask about the church, sister?" Beryl snapped that her movements danced to a completely different rhythm than a warrior's or a swordsman's. He exhaled, convinced no one could see through Faye's disguise. Gotoga shoved the suspicious young man into the spotlight and declared him Prince Glenn. Right then, Alucha and him sank into a low, trembling bow before the prince. He crashed to his knees, forehead to the floor, begging forgiveness for his rude outburst. The prince wasn't angry at all. He met him with a gentle, forgiving smile. He slipped into the country cloaked among the knights who'd entered earlier, hiding in their ranks to dodge the assassins. Faye, the older woman, sealed it with a sharp nod. She backed the young man's point. She revealed she'd served in Glenn's royal guard, secretly masking her true identity behind a maid's disguise. They hurled themselves between Glenn and the assassins hunting him. The plan was that she'd remain disguised while the royal guard formed an unbreakable wall to shield her. As the festival roared, assassins slipped into the crowd, waiting to ambush and end him.